Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1041, Dazzling Light. When Zen had ascended into the upper world and met Yolanda, he felt a sense of unfamiliarity. In fact, even now, this feeling of strangeness had not yet disappeared. In Zen's eyes, the Yolanda in front of him was not any different to the two clones from the lower world when it came to appearance. However, she was clearly a completely different person. In other words, the Yolanda he had known had disappeared, replaced by this one. Even though the Yolanda before him had inherited the memories of the two clones, those memories were just 2 in a million. The reason why Yolanda had such a deep impression of Zen was because she had extracted the memories of him from the memories of a million clones of herself. If Yolanda had not also extracted her memories of Javier, he would have been a stranger to her. Javier had come to the Mist Palace because he had feelings for Yolanda, and she had noticed him because of his outstanding performance. She understood his intentions, but it still did not change the fact that he was like a stranger to her. However, from the looks of it, Javier would not give up until he had achieved his aim. Zen shook his head slightly. So what if Javier proved his strength in the future? It was not like Yolanda would fall in love with him just because he was powerful. If she were an ordinary woman, it might have been possible. But she was the daughter of a supreme lord, and she had power and a high position. How could she give herself over to someone so easily? Of course, this had nothing to do with Zen. The warriors below continued to fly toward the red cloud ring in an orderly manner. Those that passed through stood behind the leader and vice leaders of Mist Palace. Those that failed left in disappointment. Gradually, fewer and fewer warriors were flying up. "Are you still not going?" asked Layla, who was standing next to Zen. "You should go up first," Zen said. "Actually, I want you to go first," said Layla. "But since you suggested it so nicely, I'll go first." The next moment, Layla's feet lightly kicked the ground. She rose up and after circling in the air for a while, she nimbly moved toward the red cloud ring. She turned around and cast a proud smile at Zen before flying toward the ring. The instant Layla passed through the red cloud ring, a scarlet ray of light was released. The ray of light spread rapidly along the ring. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The entire red cloud ring began to hum with a sound. At the same time, dazzling rays of light surged up the red cloud ring like waves, unwilling to diminish. The light was so bright that the red cloud ring no longer looked like a ring to the crowd below. It was more like a giant fireball or a sun. What a strong response. The woman must be a great talent. How many petals did her lotus flower sprout? Javier's lotus flower sprouted 9 petals. Could it be that she has surpassed it? No wonder she is so arrogant, daring to challenge the entire Mist Palace. Her talent is indeed praiseworthy. The vice leaders of the Mist Palace held surprised expressions on their faces. They had some information on Layla. Not long ago, she had used the Tiger Roar token to challenge the talents in the Mist Palace. The vice leaders had asked around and found out that she was the personal disciple of the former leader, so they did not question her further. They might as well let her do anything she liked if she was the ex-leader's personal disciple. The personal disciple of the former leader was certainly not weak, regardless of strength or talent. However, they had not expected her to trigger such a reaction from the red cloud ring. Yolanda's expression betrayed a trace of surprise. To make the red cloud ring react this way, her lotus flower must have sprouted 9 petals too. "I agree," a vice leader nodded. "It must be so. If my guess is correct, her 9-petal lotus flower should be at the top level. If she can trigger and pass the 10th small heavenly tribulation, there might even be a chance to activate the Mahayana lotus flower." The Mahayana lotus flower. Another vice leader sighed and added, "Master Shao's luck favors him. He has such a talented personal disciple, and he is about to become a supreme lord. What's more, he has managed to avoid the 5 aging processes. What a fortunate man." The number of warriors in the universe who had activated the Mahayana lotus flower were few and far between. Yolanda nodded and smiled. This girl should have a place in the world of chaos. However, she did not dare to confirm this claim. Now that the world of chaos had begun forming and would last for a very long time, many things were unknown and could not be ascertained beforehand. Even if Layla was fated to lead the world of chaos and was the favorite of this era, she might not necessarily be able to become the main character of the era. Moreover, from Yolanda's point of view, Layla was too arrogant. Although Yolanda had not left her palace in some time, she understood some things, one of which was that Layla provoked Zen time and again. Layla was simply courting death. If she continued to do so, no matter how lucky she was doomed. Of course, Yolanda did not have time to care for such things. She did not give Zen any advice or special treatment. He had his own fate and she would let him walk his own path. Zen, why haven't you gone up yet? Yolanda glanced at Zen. Actually, Zen's and Javier's statuses were very similar. Both of them had ascended to the upper world. Both had met Yolanda's clones while they were still in the lower world. Both were equally outstanding. However, when Yolanda read her clone's memories, she was shocked at the information she found regarding Zen. He was even more impressive than Javier. Yolanda's impression of Zen ran many times deeper than that of Javier. Layla floated in the sky. She was introduced into the Mist Palace by the former leader and should have been standing behind Yolanda, but she floated alone at the side instead. As for Red Cloud Ring, its brilliance was still as magnificent as before. The fiery red light illuminated her face. She looked rather calm despite the shocked gazes of the crowd, but deep inside, she felt somewhat proud. That did not mean she was satisfied. Her goals were not limited to the small Mist Palace. She was going to face all the top talents in the universe, and she was going to win her place in the world of chaos. Passing the torch was just the beginning of this. As the light slowly dimmed down, the Red Cloud Ring returned to its original peaceful state. Behind her, several other warriors also flew up. This time, Layla stared down at Zen. Zen, it's your turn. Don't you want to join passing the torch? Zen had repeatedly rejected her challenges, so she had no choice left but to defeat him in passing the torch. Hearing Layla's words, Zen smiled. Many of the warriors focused their gazes on Zen. Recently, one of the two new talents with impressive performances was Layla, and the other was Zen. In truth, many of the warriors of Mist Palace were curious as to which of the two was more powerful. However, Zen had only fought two warriors at Mist Palace. The first time, he had defeated a warrior from Ice Cloud House. The second time, he had almost taken Jim's life. Jim was ranked after 200 in Swallow Cloud House. It was difficult to ascertain Zen's true strength from that encounter. However, Layla had defeated more than 10 people in a row. Among them were those who were ranked among the top few hundred in Swallow Cloud House, and those who were ranked among the top several dozen. The fourth-ranked warrior in Swallow Cloud House had also been defeated by her. When Layla passed through the Red Cloud Ring, the light that she attracted was several times brighter than Javier's. It made everyone realize that the girl's potential far exceeded their imagination. Therefore, although the vast majority of warriors did not like Layla, they thought she was far stronger than Zen. Hurry up, come up. Layla stretched out her palm toward Zen. Her 5 slender fingers were spread open, as if she wanted to give a hand to him, who was more than a few hundred feet away. Zen nodded and circulated his chaotic energy to slowly float up to the Red Cloud Ring. Zen doesn't seem confident enough. No one knows how many petals his lotus flower has sprouted. Could it be that it only sprouted 3 petals? Is he afraid that he can't pass through the Red Cloud Ring? That's impossible. There is only a small possibility that he will cross the ring. I know how many petals my lotus flower sprouted, and so do you. Look at Zen. He is hesitating. He is afraid that he can't pass it. Chapter 1042. Who has the final say? A smile appeared on Yolanda's face when she heard these words. Her confidence in Zen, however, was strong. She didn't know how many petals Zen's lotus flower had sprouted, nor did she receive any such related memories from her 2 clones. Zen had gone through the heavenly tribulation while he had been on the Divine Kingdom continent. One of her 2 clones had then been in the eastern region, while the other on the Sea God continent. She did not ask Zen about it. Since he already had obtained the golden title of celestial position in the Tower of Sin, it would be comical if he could not even pass the Red Cloud Ring. Zen maintained his normal speed as he slowly flew toward the Red Cloud Ring. Those who had failed were all standing below. Curious as to whether or not Zen would pass the Red Cloud Ring, everyone had their attention on him. Although Zen's speed was slow, the height of the Red Cloud Ring was only about 200 to 300 feet. In a short while, he arrived before the ring. The Red Cloud Ring in its normal state was like a red-hot iron ring, showing streaks of dark red light. Under the gaze of everyone present, Zen quietly headed in the direction of the red cloud ring. It was clear to see that the red cloud ring did not produce the transparent membrane to block Zen. Furthermore, the moment he passed through, the red cloud ring seemed to sense something. A streak of scarlet light began to accumulate on the ring. The momentum of the light is so fierce. It seems to surpass Layla's light. That can't be possible. The light the red cloud ring released when Layla passed through probably reached the ring's limit. How could that be surpassed? Let's wait and have a look first. There will always be a superior. In the air above the red cloud ring, Layla bit her lips and stared intently at the red cloud ring. Why was it that she considered Zen her opponent? The reason was definitely not because he took away her master's Thunderwind divine sword. However, that day, her master had told her in secret that Zen had the same fate as her, the fate to lead the world of chaos. Moreover, there seemed to be some uncertainty about Zen's fate, which meant that no one could tell for certain how his future would turn out. Zen was qualified to be her opponent. Layla did not take the talents of Mist Palace seriously at all. For instance, although Javier was a powerful and talented warrior, she thought he was no match for her. As such, ever since she had entered Mist Palace, she could have lived in a secluded place to cultivate without any disturbance. However, she had chosen the small palace in Ice Cloud House to become Zen's neighbor on purpose. After issuing the challenge through the Tiger Roar token, Layla had hoped that Zen would challenge her. However, he did not care at all and casually ignored her. She had provoked him multiple times and even demolished his house, but he still chose to disregard her. In the end, Layla had no options left. She could not possibly attack Zen without a proper reason. Although the most crucial part of the test was passing the torch, she could also have an idea of Zen's talent from the reaction of the red cloud ring. Seeing the light accumulated on the red cloud ring become brighter and brighter than before, Layla became nervous. With her proud nature, she was certain that there were not many talents in the universe who could compare with her, and in the 13 palaces there were even fewer of them. The light on the red cloud ring continued to gather, about to surge through with brilliance. Yolanda watched the scene unfold. A look of disbelief was evident in her eyes. As for Timothy, the vice leader, he pulled a long face. However, suddenly, the light accumulated by the red cloud ring disappeared. The bright light disappeared, but that was not important. Under normal circumstances, the red cloud ring remained lit with a dark red color. However, at this moment, the dark red light also disappeared, making the entire red cloud ring turn into a black-colored iron ring. When the crowd saw this scene, they were stunned. How could this be? Could it be that the red cloud ring gave out? How is that possible? The red cloud ring is a first-rank divine weapon, after all. It's not like it has been damaged by an attack, so it's impossible for it to come to an end just like that. Whether it was the warriors in the sky or the ones below, everyone was discussing among themselves. As a treasure of Mist Palace used to screen talents, the red cloud ring had never before been damaged. Zen had just passed through the red cloud ring when he saw what happened. What is going on? He thought. Meanwhile, Layla heaved a long sigh of relief. She did not think that the red cloud ring would prove anything. This was just a small screening conducted by Mist Palace before passing the torch. Even if Zen was able to make the red cloud ring release a stronger light, it did not mean that his talent was better than hers. Layla did not wish for Zen to surpass her when it came to the red cloud ring. As she had watched the light brewing on the red cloud ring grow larger, she had grown worried. Now that the red cloud ring gave out, she was once again at ease. Yolanda gently floated toward the red cloud ring, her expression growing grave. She glanced at Zen listlessly before reaching out to touch the red cloud ring. As her finger gently touched it, the ring was activated and it once again released a red light. What's going on? Zen asked out aloud. Yolanda stared at Zen, the corners of her mouth slightly lifted. Why don't you try again? Zen nodded and went round the red cloud ring, following Yolanda's instructions. He again went up from below. In the end, it yielded the same result as last time. The red glow on the red cloud ring extinguished after having been restored for a while. Then the ring turned black and lost its luster. Seeing this, Yolanda blinked. She waved her fingers at him and said, "All right. You've passed." Zen nodded, no longer bothered by the strange occurrence. He flew up into the air and stood side by side with the other warriors who had passed through the red cloud ring. But at this moment, Timothy said, "Miss, isn't doing this against the rules?" According to the rules, if one wants to participate in passing the torch, they have to go through the selection process of the red cloud ring. Zen hasn't passed it. Yolanda said coldly, "He has already passed the red cloud ring." But there's a problem with the red cloud ring. Timothy argued with reason. He still passed the ring, Yolanda replied, maintaining her stance. Timothy let out a cold laugh. So you're saying that if one doesn't activate the red cloud ring, he still passes? Doesn't that mean that everyone else can pass the test and take part in passing the torch? If so, what is the point in passing the red cloud ring? If this rascal is allowed to pass, wouldn't it be unfair to the other warriors? In fact, as long as one was not blind, one could clearly see that the red cloud ring extinguished only after Zen had crossed it. However, Timothy's words triggered the anger of the warriors below who hadn't passed the test. Only less than 10% of the warriors had passed through the red cloud ring. The other 90% would not be able to participate in passing the torch. Obviously, they were disappointed and unhappy. When they heard Timothy's words, they joined in as well. That's right, if you let him pass, shouldn't everyone else be able to pass as well? You have to make him pass it again. Or else it is fraud. They shouted out aloud. Hearing the voices of the warriors below, Yolanda was furious. Her eyes became cold as ice. She had already guessed what the problem was, but she didn't want to say it. Just now, when Zen had passed through the red cloud ring for the first time and the light extinguished, she had figured out what happened. He had activated the Mahayana lotus flower. The red cloud ring could only sense the Hinayana lotus flower. Beyond this, the ring did not react normally, so its light extinguished straight away. According to Yolanda's previous deductions, Zen's lotus flower had at least sprouted 7 petals. It was very likely that it had sprouted 9 petals, like Javier's, or perhaps it was the top-level 9-petal lotus flower, like Layla's. However, she had never expected Zen to activate the Mahayana lotus flower when he was only at the 5th grade of the life and death realm. However, her deduction was only based on the reaction of the red cloud ring. How many petals had Zen's Mahayana lotus flower sprouted? 11 petals, 13, or even 15, she did not ask Zen. Facing Timothy's doubts, she only laughed coldly and stared at him, saying, "In Mist Palace, who has the final say?" Chapter 1043, In the Apeiron Tower. Yolanda wasn't argumentative type, she respected the opinions of others, as long as they respected hers. Although she was the leader of the Mist Palace, she spent most of her time cultivating in silence, and did not take her position overly serious. As for the reason why Timothy had always been so aggressive and was always stirring up trouble for her, it was nothing more than a dispute over leadership of the palace. This time, however, Yolanda did not remain silent. Instead she questioned them firmly, who is in charge here? After all, she was the leader of the Mist Palace. The other vice leaders of the palace hadn't had any disagreement on this matter to begin with. They were all well aware of the reason for the dysfunction of the red cloud ring. It was most likely because it couldn't accurately test Zen's ability, so it had failed to work properly. However, Zen did indeed possess the skills and power to participate in passing the torch. If Zen was not qualified, he would have been bounced back when he just started to pass through the red cloud ring. They were all just curious as to how many lotus petals Zen had activated. As for Timothy, he was simply looking for trouble, as usual. Now that Yolanda had taken a stronger stance, Timothy's eyes revealed only traces of malice, but he didn't dare to say anything else. As for those martial artists that hadn't passed the red cloud ring, how could they dare to say anything in front of Yolanda? It would just seem like crying over spilled milk to become disgruntled afterwards. The selection by the red cloud ring is now over. The 356 martial artists who have passed the red cloud ring, come with me. As Yolanda finished speaking, she turned around and flew off in a specific direction. The martial artists of the Swallow Cloud House that Javier was from looked at each other curiously and followed closely behind Yolanda. The other vice leaders of the palace also led their martial artists to follow after her. Zen and Layla were the last to leave. The two of them were considered to be freaks within the Mist Palace. Although they were nominal warriors of the Ice Cloud House, in truth, they had strength comparable to that of the warriors of the Swallow Cloud House. Most surprisingly, both of them were life and death realm warriors, and what was most difficult to believe was that Zen was only at the 5th level of the life and death realm. Following after Yolanda, the group left the Mist Palace and entered the space tunnel. Over the next 60 hours, the massive group of several hundred people traveled through the space tunnel with Yolanda in the lead. Although their speed wasn't slow, as they traveled across the Supreme World, it would usually have taken them years. Even though they were traveling via the Supreme World Channel, the distance that many martial artists had finished was nothing compared to the size of the Supreme World. After they followed Yolanda out of the space tunnel, a large city with strange spiraling towers appeared in front of them. This was not their destination, it was only a stop along the way. Although to the martial artists, this was only a stop, there were tens of millions of living creatures inhabiting the foreign city. After they landed, everyone boarded a large ship of a foreign design. Once more they entered a supreme world channel and continued on their journey. Fortunately, they didn't need to continue using their life vitality to fly as they could now travel on this large ship. Zen found a quiet place and closed his eyes to cultivate. While he was cultivating, he tried to use the memories of the great world to check on the situation of the lower world. Although he was very far from the great world he had come from, with the fusion of his soul and the will of the great world, he could still look up memories within the great world at any time. However, he was unable to use the power transfer technique up here. After a while, he found that Amber had already ascended. When he had returned to the Sea God continent last time, Amber had successfully gone through another heavenly tribulation. It was very likely that she was also driven out by the great world just like he had been. With Amber's talent, she should be able to develop well in the Demon Knight, Zen thought, and was greatly pleased. His attention turned to the central region. It seemed that while he was gone, Aura's cultivation had steadily risen, but Margaret was still nowhere to be found. As for Letitia, she seemed to be getting a plumpness to her figure. There was a soft glow in her face that spoke of great joy and possible maternity. Zen suddenly realized something and searched further into the memories with a growing excitement. Only then did he discover that Letitia was pregnant with his baby. The memories of this great world had recorded everything from its birth up to this moment. It had recorded almost everything that had happened in every passing minute. Zen now traced back through time and continuously searched for the memories about Letitia within recent times. Only then did he realize that a few days before he had left, Letitia had already discovered that she was pregnant. "I'm going to be a father." Zen couldn't help exclaiming aloud. He was sitting on the spot, still in a daze, but his face was immediately filled with joy. The pregnancy had not been anticipated, but was welcome all the same. It was a pity that he had only discovered this now that he had ascended to the upper world. He had wanted to stay in the lower world for a bit longer. However, the great world didn't allow it. Zen had been forced to ascend here, and could do nothing to stop it back then. And now that Zen had ascended, it would be impossible for him to return to the lower world anytime soon. He felt sad that Letitia now had to face all of the struggles of motherhood alone. A martial artist had to constantly challenge nature if he wanted to advance further in his cultivation. Hence, the land of warmth and tenderness with women was a tomb for a hero. Although Zen was concerned about his family in his heart, he also knew that there were some things that he couldn't change. You can't have your cake and eat it, as the saying went. He couldn't have things both ways in this world. Sacrifices had to be made to advance in cultivation. After searching through the memories again, he still could not find any traces of Margaret. It seemed that she had truly remained on the Purple Power world the entire time, but Zen had no idea what she had been doing there. At this very moment, in the Purple Power world, there were 3 buildings in one tower that were very famous in the Purple Power world. The 3 buildings were the Purple Jade Building, the Soul Enchanting Building, and the Moon Building. And the tower was known as the Apeiron Tower, which was the most powerful among the 4 structures. Since the tower was called the Apeiron Tower, it clearly had something to do with Elder Apeiron. However, the tower was indeed boundless. It was 30,000 feet wide and 1 million feet high, so it could be said to be more of a massive constructed mountain than a tower. It was an awe-inspiring sight to behold. At this very moment, Margaret was throwing a tantrum on one of the many floors of the Apeiron Tower. I don't want to cultivate anymore. Humph humph. Margaret brought down her hands. Then the countless great swords that were hovering in the air, under her power, suddenly came crashing down. The sound of metal hitting stone was a great cacophony of jangled sound. The other warriors who were caught under the sudden shower of giant swords tried to escape. "Margaret, you can't do that. Elder Apeiron said that you must train for 2 hours today. In fact, you have improved 1,000 times faster than any ordinary martial artist before you. If you practice just a bit more, then it will benefit you greatly." Many of the elders came to Margaret's side and attempted to persuade her. "I won't cultivate anymore." Margaret began to cry. It was a heart-rending sound full of grievance. She had never, ever, practiced seriously like this since she was a child. Back when she was in the ethereal city, her family had always let her have her way. This was also the reason why, even if she had the purple power body, she remained inferior to some illuminating soul realm martial artists when she was at the internal elixir realm. Her foundation was too weak to support greater cultivation and advancement. As Zen had ascended to the upper world, Margaret had wanted to meet him in the upper world and give him a big surprise, which was why she had agreed to meet Elder Apeiron and to enter the Apeiron Tower, and take the Elder as her master. In the beginning, Margaret had been able to endure the rigid practice, but as time passed, she couldn't bear it anymore. The cultivation of martial arts required one to practice every day. And there were endless rounds. How could Margaret, who had been fond of playing the zither and admiring the flowers, possibly get used to this? She simply didn't have a work ethic which could support her advancement. Therefore, she had become more and more resistant to the practice sessions in the past few days, annoying the other disciples in the Apeiron Tower with her relentless wailing and moaning. She was acting like a spoiled child. Margaret hadn't been in the Apeiron Tower for very long. Compared to the thousands of years of time many warriors spent in training, the several months she had stayed here were really a short span of time. However, in these few months, Margaret had already broken various records, and her outstanding talent had made the other disciples extremely jealous of her. The main reason for her excellent performances was because of her special purple power body. Ordinary martial artists' purple power body was far inferior to hers, and the cultivation methods taught in the purple power world were almost all related to the purple power body. This gave her a distinct advantage. What left everyone even more speechless was that Margaret wanted to give up after such a short time of practice. If she really did give up, her great talent would go to waste. Elder Apeiron of course wouldn't allow that to happen. Although she had been away for a few days, she had instructed a few elders to take care of Margaret in her absence. She had truly treated Margaret as a treasure. It was no wonder that Margaret had attracted so many jealous gazes. Margaret, on the path of martial arts, perseverance and willpower are keys for success. If you give up so easily, how can you have any achievement in the future? An elder said, hoping to inspire her. I don't want to have any more achievements. I have a husband, and I'm just a common girl. Margaret whined sulkily. Another elder shook her head and said, I know that your husband is not an ordinary warrior. The world of martial artists is also very cruel. Even if you are husband and wife, you have to be a match. You need to be able to keep up to him in his cultivation and journeys. And in the future, if you want to always be with your husband, you have to work hard now. Zen isn't that kind of person. Margaret wailed again, and angrily refuted the elder's advice. Anyway, Margaret could not stand this kind of repeated practice any longer. Chapter 1044, Orange Sea World. Hearing Margaret's words, another elder laughed and said, I admit that you are right to a certain extent. However, it's quite normal for a man to have several wives. And since he has ascended to the upper world, it's possible that he might have found a new partner there. How are you going to compete with his new wife, if you are not strong enough? Actually, this was pure speculation on the elder's part. She didn't know Zen, and so she didn't know his true character. She had only heard from the tower head that her husband thought highly of Zen's strength and talent. She hadn't witnessed it firsthand. But she wanted Margaret to focus on her cultivation, so she had no other choice but to spout this sort of a nonsensical theory. She wanted to motivate Margaret to concentrate on her cultivation. Well, I don't care, Margaret declared. This method had been used too many times. It was pretty effective originally, but gradually it was becoming more and more ineffective due to the boredom of cultivation. Margaret sat grumpily in the corner, unwilling to pick up her sword and continue with her training. Margaret was throwing a tantrum and the elders were out of ideas to persuade her. Everyone was at their wits' end. This girl was such a stubborn student. It was all the more frustrating for the elders as Margaret had a great talent for cultivation that was not inferior to her brothers. However, she was obstinate and had always been pampered by the elders in her clan, so no one was able to arm-twist her into cultivating. Perhaps Zen would be the person who could tame this shrew. Those elders in front of her were all famous figures in the purple power world, yet none of them had a way to persuade her into cultivating. Just then a figure quietly walked in and stood not far away from them. When Margaret saw that person, she said in an aggrieved tone, Master. The others noticed her too and turned to greet her respectfully, Elder Apeiron. Elder Apeiron strolled towards them. Seeing the grievance on Margaret's face, she smiled softly and said, I heard that the illusion battlefield will open in a few years. Margaret looked at her with curiosity and asked, Master, what is the illusion battlefield? Elder Apeiron smiled and asked, You have cultivated in an illusion space before, haven't you? Creating illusion space was a very common practice in the upper world. Many great sacred places had this sort of space, which served as a platform for warriors to spar with each other. Margaret nodded in reply. She had practiced in that space as well. Elder Apiran continued, when the illusion battlefield is thrown open, all the younger generation warriors from different races all around the universe will compete and fight with each other. I believe Zen will also participate in this event. Margaret pondered over this for a moment and said, so, if you can reach the Soul Sea realm in the coming years, I will help you to enter the illusion battlefield. If you can fight for your place in the illusion battlefield using your own strength, you might have the chance to meet Zen there. Elder Apiran said with an enigmatic smile. Really? Margaret was startled with this piece of information. However, the enemies you will meet in the illusion battlefield will be from all races from across the universe. There will be experts from all sorts of races, and their talents and strength cannot be underestimated. It won't be easy for you to meet Zen. Elder Apiran added with a meaningful look. Is that so? Remarked Margaret, the surprise on her face slowly changing to hesitation. She had learned a lot after entering the Apiran Tower. She understood the many advantages of her purple power body as well as her great potential in martial arts. She was very confident in her own talent, but not in her perseverance to follow through something. The main reason of her impatience was that she didn't know how long it would actually be before she could see Zen again if she continued cultivating like this. Would it take 10 years? Or 100 years? Or even 1,000 years? The thought alone was enough to make her tingle with fear. However, if she could reach the Soul Sea realm and then enter the illusion battlefield like Elder Apiran had said, she might just get the opportunity to meet Zen. I can guarantee you that if you work hard in your cultivation, your chances of meeting Zen in the illusion battlefield will be very high. Elder Apiran assured her. Margaret pursed her lips, a trace of determination slowly appearing in her eyes. She would work very hard for Zen. She would put in her heart and soul if it meant getting a chance to meet him. I understand now, Master. The great ship on which Zen was entered the trans-border channel and began to travel across different supreme worlds. Zen was not so lucky as Margaret in comparison. Ever since she had entered the Apiran Tower, Elder Apiran had tried to satisfy whatever she wanted. Moreover, she enjoyed an exalted status in the tower and was even addressed as the young master. She never lacked words of encouragement when she was tired of cultivating. But Zen had to fight for everything he required. It was said that passing the torch would reward a warrior richly. Naturally, Zen wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. A few days later, the ship finally left the trans-border channel to reveal a strange world in front of them. Yolanda led the Mist Palace's warriors out of the ship and continued flying onward. Below them was a stretch of orange-colored water. This boundless orange sea was indeed quite a bizarre sight for visitors. This world, Zen mumbled with a puzzled expression on his face. He detected a strange aura here. Layla, who was flying next to him, was calm and composed as she spoke. This is a shattered supreme world. A shattered supreme world, is it the same as the purple power world? Zen asked. She nodded and replied, that's why the Alliance chose this place for the passing the torch. This broken world was once called the Orange Sea World because all the seawater in this world is orange. The Orange Sea World was home to a particular type of tiny organism, which was great in number and densely scattered across the ocean. It was their color that dyed the entire ocean orange. Tens of millions of years ago, the Orange Sea World had been a complete supreme world. However, several supreme lords of the human race had a skirmish with each other, which had led to a battle in the Orange Sea World. The supreme world hadn't been able to withstand the massive power of these supreme lords and had been shattered into pieces in the end. Only 10% of the original Orange Sea World survived, so the present world could no longer be considered a supreme world. Their destination was a gigantic island called Willow Island in the Orange Sea World. It would host the passing the torch. This island was so named only by the warriors in the upper world. According to the standards in the lower world, this so-called island was 10 times larger than the central region and could easily pass off as a continent. After hearing Layla's introduction, Zen nodded and smiled with gratitude. She might have caused many troubles in the Mist Palace, but she still was a good source of information. After all, he had come from the lower world, and Yolanda was the only one he knew in the Mist Palace. He didn't want to bother her with every small question he had. So he didn't even know what passing the torch was actually about. 2 hours later, the warriors from the Mist Palace finally arrived at the island. After walking on the island for an hour, a huge rock appeared in front of their eyes. The rock was about 10,000 feet high and 100,000 feet wide. A poem was carved onto its surface. The poem was etched deep into the mammoth rock, and the words seemed to contain some kind of magical power within them. Many warriors looked uncomfortable as they stared at the words, as if the strokes of the words contained sharp swords, which could cut their hearts out any minute. However, most warriors tried to suppress their discomfort when they looked around and found out that other people remained calm. As warriors, they refused to admit being inferior to others. Since other people could bear the pressure, they would try to stand it as well in order not to lose their faces. Layla suddenly turned to Zen and asked with a smile, "How do you feel?" He stared at the words on the rock and replied softly, "I feel a little uncomfortable." Her lips curled as she said, "You're an honest man. Look at those fellows in front of us. They are all in great pain but still pretend as if nothing has happened. They are dead determined to save their faces." She didn't bother to lower her voice so some warriors heard her. They were furious but also embarrassed because she had revealed their true feelings. The writing on the rock was indeed tortuous for many warriors. This poem was carved by a supreme lord with his sword. The sword intent contained within the words can aim directly at one's heart. His sword intent was praised to be perfect, having absolutely no flaws. Layla explained. She could feel the anger of the warriors, but she didn't seem to mind it in the slightest as she continued to enlighten Zen. Chapter 1045. Supreme Lord Sword's Legend. Zen's eyes lit up at Layla's words. "No flaws?" he asked. Although Zen had comprehended the consummate sword intent and even created the no move, he did not dare guarantee that his sword intent would have no flaws whatsoever. However, the no move did not have a fixed style. If one wanted to break it, one would have to move heaven and earth to do so. That did not mean that no one could break it, but so far, Zen had not encountered anyone who could. Of course, how could the sword intent of the master of Killing Sword Mountain have any flaws? Layla asked with pride. The master of Killing Sword Mountain? A curious light gleamed in Zen's eyes. Layla pursed her lips. Zen really has come from the lower world, hasn't he? He doesn't seem to know anything at all, she thought. Suddenly, a cold voice resounded in Zen's mind. It was Lavender. She was referring to Supreme Lord Sword. Among so many Supreme Lords in the universe, he is an extremely powerful one. His sword is lodged at the top of the Killing Sword Mountain, which is the highest position. If you have any questions, ask me. Don't ask this woman again. Needless to say, Lavender found Layla intolerable. However, Lavender did not know much about the affairs of the human race, such as the broken Orange Sea world. Neither did she know enough about passing the torch. After all, these were internal matters of the Alliance. But how could she not know about Supreme Lord Sword and the Killing Sword Mountain? Zen nodded in understanding, but his eyes were still fixed on the poem on the huge rock. Each word of the poem was about several hundred feet in height and width. As he got closer to the words, he could feel the sharp sword intent radiating from them. The warriors at the front had already turned their heads away, unwilling to look at the giant words. However, Zen's gaze grew more and more intentional. Under such an intense gaze, the large characters seemed to move. Suddenly, a sword intent shot straight at Zen. The shadow of the sword intent was very faint. Zen stared at it for a long time but could only see vague outlines. Zen did not fight back. He let the sword intent come at him. The moment the sword intent pierced into his body, an uncomfortable feeling arose in him, as if somebody had truly stabbed him with a sword. So the reason why everybody felt uncomfortable when they saw these words was because of the invisible sword intent. Zen's eyes lit up at the thought. Could this invisible sword intent temper his own sword intent? Although Zen assumed it might be the case, he was still a bit uncertain. Even if he was not sure, he would still give it a try. Yolanda, who was in front of them, led them around the giant rock. At the same time, she turned around, speaking to everyone. Our destination is behind the giant rock. As she finished speaking, she saw Zen halt in his steps. She looked at Zen curiously. Hey, what are you doing? Do you get scared stiff so easily? Yolanda also flew over. Although she had no reason to intervene in Zen's business, passing the torch was very important and she had to know what Zen was up to. What's wrong, Zen? Yolanda followed his gaze. Is there a problem with the words? I want to give it a try, Zen said. Try what? Yolanda asked eagerly. Layla's gaze gleamed with curiosity as she looked at Zen. Zen had already taken the Thunderwind Divine Sword out of his space ring by now. He pointed at the words and said, I can see a faint sword intent. I want to try and see if I can temper my sword intent with it. When they heard this, both Yolanda and Layla stared at him, their eyes wide as saucers. That's impossible. You think the legend is true? Layla cried out. Yolanda stared at Zen, seemingly lost in thought. Back when she had brought Zen to Mist Palace, she had told herself that anything was possible with him. However, she did not think that he would perform so many miracles in such a short amount of time after coming here. Noting their exaggerated reactions, Zen looked at them strangely. Due to his lack of concentration, the faint shadow of the sword intent had long disappeared. It was as if he had to be extremely alert and focused to be able to see the sword intent. What's wrong? Zen asked in confusion. Yolanda did not answer his question but asked, can you really see the sword intent? What does it look like? Layla also stared fixedly at Zen, but did not say anything. Yolanda had already asked him the question on her mind. It's just a pale white sword, Zen explained. It's about 2 feet long, rather short. The Thunderwind Divine sword in Zen's hand was 5 feet long, almost twice the length of the white sword he had seen. Yolanda nodded and sighed. Then it is indeed Supreme Lord Sword's sword. His sword is 2.5 feet long, white in color. It is said that Supreme Lord Sword can battle against a true god. Layla pouted. In fact, she believed Zen more than Yolanda herself did. Yolanda asked Zen the question because she was suspicious, but Layla had already known that Zen knew nothing of the Orange Sea World or Supreme Lord Sword, which was why it was even more impossible for him to know about this legend. Naturally, he could not make up a story to fool them. As such, what he said was correct. Seeing Yolanda's shocked expression, Zen asked, what happened? It happened inside the human race, but the legend is very famous, Lavender told Zen. Supreme Lord Sword earned his title because it was said that he could compete with a true god with his swordsmanship. However, he did not have a successor. His swordsmanship had disappeared along with him. According to the legends, he had carved his swordsmanship into a poem, evidently the one that was inscribed on the massive rock before them. It was said that if one could see his sword intent in the poem, he would be able to comprehend his swordsmanship and be considered his successor. This legend had once been popular among the warriors. It was the reason why many swordsmen spent their savings and became destitute. They wished to read the poem and comprehend the swordsmanship. They wanted to learn the ultimate skill of Supreme Lord Sword, a swordsmanship that could fight a true god. All swordsmen yearned for such power. After Lavender narrated the first half of the story to Zen mentally, Yolanda told him the remaining part. She pointed to the small island below. Look at the densely packed pits in the ground below, Yolanda said. Zen looked in the direction indicated by Yolanda. Numerous small pits were present in the ground. It could make one's hair stand on end, for there were probably millions of them. What are these? Zen asked curiously. The pits were created by swordsmen who sat quietly in front of the rock, in order to meditate. There were warriors who had great perseverance. In order to comprehend Supreme Lord Sword's sword intent, they had been willing to spend all their lives here, no matter how arduous it was. Some life and death realm warriors almost threw away their entire life's worth of time before this giant rock. Just like that, they sat and meditated, visualizing and comprehending, hoping that one day they would be able to see through the mystery of the poem. If one sat here for tens of thousands of years, it would cause the ground to cave in and a pit to appear. As he heard this, Zen sucked in a sharp breath of cold air before asking in concern, did anyone succeed? Yolanda had a small smile on her face as she shook her head. No, not a single one of them. What, they spent their entire lives here, yet they failed. It must have been such a loss to them. Zen sighed. They were like gamblers. The more they lost, the more stubborn they became. In the end, they were no longer able to leave and spent their entire lives on the gambling table. They thought that if they won, they would learn the outstanding swordsmanship. But they lost, so they could only accept the bitter outcome, Yolanda said. Truly admirable, Zen said. However, Layla frowned. It's not like everyone just accepted the outcome so easily. There were still some who could not do it. A lot of people accused Supreme Lord Sword right after going through the 5 aging processes. It is said that they too carved their words here, but I don't know exactly where. Yolanda shook her head and pointed in a direction. They are over there. Chapter 1046, Comprehension. Zen and Layla looked in the direction which Yolanda was pointing in, and saw some dense words inscribed on the rock. Some of these words were huge and some were small. The huge ones were as tall as a person, while the small ones were only the size of a palm. They were written in a myriad of styles. I gave up my great future and spent all my life here, yet ended up gaining nothing. I must tell everyone in the universe that this is only a scam concocted by Supreme Lord Sword. Liar. Supreme Lord Sword is a great liar. I wasted 10,000 years of my time here and only encountered the 5 aging processes. If I am able to reincarnate and am fortunate enough to come here again, I will definitely shatter this stone. Alas, newcomers, stop dreaming, just focus on cultivating your own methods. If you want to comprehend Supreme Lord Sword's sword intent in these words, be warned that this is just nonsense. Life is so short, don't waste your time here. Between these dense lines of writing, there were traces of pessimism and advice scattered for the later generations, by the prior generations, to give up on the futile observation. Seeing the words, Zen sighed and shook his head. He could understand these people's feelings. They had spent all their lives here, but in the end, they had gained nothing. If he was one of them, he himself would find it hard to accept this fate. Why is there no one here now? Zen asked curiously. From the pits on the ground, Zen could imagine that there should have been many warriors who had come here to observe the rock, but now, he didn't see any signs of them. Their bodies had over years shaped pits in the ground where they had sat in watchful meditation as they had all focused on the rock. Since the Orange Sea world became the place for the Alliance to hold passing the torch, ordinary warriors aren't able to enter it. Moreover, no one in living memory has been able to comprehend the mysteries within it, not for millions of years. Many warriors have also begun to doubt the legend. However, there are occasionally warriors who would come to meditate, Yolanda said as she looked around before shaking her head. But I don't see them today. Layla stared at Zen and asked, Zen, are you sure you saw that white sword shadow? Although Yolanda and Layla didn't think that Zen was lying, they still didn't dare believe that he could see that white sword shadow. After all, in the past millions of years, countless warriors had come to observe the rock and not a single one had managed to discover the secret. It was inconceivable that Zen would see the white sword shadow right after he had just arrived here. The vice leaders and talents of the Mist Palace waited at the side of the huge rock, avoiding the intimidating aura of the words with downcast eyes. What are they doing? It seems like that guy said he saw through the mysteries of the rock. That is simply impossible. Supreme Lord Sword's poem is already a joke in the universe. It is clearly a complete and utter lie. Why are you so emotional? You know what? One of my uncles was about to reach the Spirit Supreme realm, yet he chose to come here to observe the rock instead. We could only watch helplessly as he encountered the 5 aging processes and passed away. When Timothy heard about Zen's claim, he flashed a mocking smile and taunted, Humph. I believe this brat is only bragging. There have been many warriors like him. They saw nothing, yet they lied and said that they saw something. These people were common rubbish. Some of them claimed that they saw a huge chessboard, some said they saw snakes, and some said that they saw tens of thousands of swords. They were all talking nonsense. Actually, Timothy was telling the truth. Observing the rock gradually became a real deception, and it even seemed to have driven some of the observers mad. Some fabricated strange things, telling other warriors that they could see something, in order to defraud them of their money and belongings. In a word, there were so many disputes and stories around the rock that it was difficult to describe them in detail or know what the truth was. Let's go. Warriors from the other palaces should have been waiting for us. We don't need to wait for that brat, Timothy said in a cold voice. He was here to take the talents of the Mist Palace to take part in passing the torch, not to see Zen observing the rock. This was a waste of their time. The other warriors all left together. In their eyes, the mystery had been there for millions of years. It was impossible for Zen to have solved it when he had just arrived. Hearing Layla's question, Zen thought for a while and shook his head. I'm not so sure. He had seen the white sword shadow, and felt it piercing into his body, which was why he had felt so uncomfortable. The vision had been slightly disconcerting. But he was not sure that it was the mystery left by Supreme Lord Sword. After hearing the story from Yolanda and Layla, Zen even began to doubt and suspect himself. So many warriors failed to solve the mystery. How could it be possible that I could solve it the moment I came here? He thought befuddled. Even though he was confident in his ample luck, he was not so sure that he could solve the mystery. Layla pursed her lips as disappointment was suddenly written all over her face. A moment ago, she had faithfully believed that Zen could solve the mystery. She looked at the retreating figures of other warriors and urged, let's not waste time here then. Yolanda stared at Zen, lost in thought. After some consideration, she nodded and said to Zen, we'd better hurry up. The warriors from the other 12 palaces should have arrived by now. May I stay here for a while? Zen asked, his face still filled with doubt and speculation. Yolanda smiled, and she realized then that Zen had seen something. So she nodded, I'll inform you when passing the torch starts. After saying that, she and Layla left the rock and flew away. When they had disappeared from sight, Zen descended to the ground. The ground was rather hard under his feet. Zen couldn't imagine how many years it had taken for the warriors to create so many pits in the ground just by sitting here and meditating. He believed it couldn't be done in anything less than decades. He found a smooth place and sat down. Then he raised his head and looked at the huge words on the rock. A while ago, when he had concentrated on the words, he had seen the white sword shadow. But once he was distracted, the shadow would disappear. Can I see it again if I concentrate? He murmured as he stared at the words and began to focus on them. Zen deepened his focus and intent. After he had observed the words for a long time, he failed to see the white sword shadow again. But he still felt uncomfortable, like a sword was piercing through him. It meant that the sword shadow was still there. It was just that he couldn't see it. Zen frowned as he concentrated and puzzled at the mystery. Is it because of my lack of concentration? He thought then, seeking the problem within, like any good warrior who quested for cultivation was wont to do. Maybe his state of mind had changed after he had heard the story from Yolanda and Layla. Thinking of this, Zen instructed himself to calm his mind. He deliberately slowed his breathing. After a few moments, he was finally able to keep a peaceful mind. After about 30 seconds, a faint light began to emerge from the huge words. There was a spectral quality to the light, and Zen stared at it, while still forcing himself to remain calm and focused. It was indeed a sword shadow. Although the shadow was rather faint, Zen was sure that he saw it again. When he was about to concentrate more in hopes of seeing more clearly, a harsh voice interrupted him in a jeering tone, "Ha ha. We have a new friend here." These last few years, few young warriors were still interested in Supreme Lord Sword's mystery. Zen's peaceful state of mind was shattered by the harsh voice. The white sword shadow immediately disappeared. He frowned in disgruntlement. He hated being disturbed at this moment of intense concentration. Warriors all hated being disturbed when they were cultivating. That was why they preferred to cultivate in seclusion. Interruptions were considered extremely rude, and the interrupted warrior had every right to become vexed and seek retribution. After all, even a light cough might cause a warrior immersed in cultivation to spiral into madness. His face became dark and sullen, and Zen raised his head to see who it was. It was a middle-aged man in dark shabby clothes. He was slightly fat and filthy. Probably, no one knew how many years it had been since he had taken a bath, or how many years he had neglected grooming the matted beard on his face. He was rather shabby looking. The man was very excited at the sight of Zen and called out to his friend, Landry. "We have another friend. Come over here." Swoosh. Another man flew over at a fast speed. He was thinner than the first one, but he looked equally dirty. Their cultivation levels are surprisingly not low at all, Zen thought. He guessed that they were both at the Spirit Supreme realm. The warrior named Landry Chen sized Zen up with a smile, his dark eyes glittering excitedly, and he asked, "Young man, do you want to comprehend the mystery hidden within the huge rock?" Zen nodded slowly. That was the reason why he had stayed here. Seeing the two warriors' bedraggled status, he asked, "How many years have you been here?" Landry Chen and the fat man looked at each other and smiled slightly insanely. Landry Chen pointed at the fat man and said, "This is Damien Shu. He has been here for more than 20,000 years. Chapter 1047, Get Hurt. Zen had learned from Yolanda that most warriors had spent tens of thousands of years on this island, observing and gaining insights. But after learning that Damien had studied it for 20,000 years, Zen could not help but marvel at that. The scenery of this willow island was pretty good. No matter what, staying there for 20,000 years meant that one would have to face the expansive and bare rock all those years. One could almost imagine just how boring it was. Zen turned to look at Landry and asked, "What about you?" Landry chuckled and proudly stretched out his fingers. 60,000 years. 60,000 years. Zen took a deep breath. Zen was merely in his 20s. But Landry had stayed there for 60,000 years only to observe and to try to unravel the mysteries left behind by Supreme Lord Sword. Landry, who seemed to be accustomed to the shocked expressions of others, softly chuckled. 60,000 years is nothing. Previously, there was an old fellow who stayed here for 130,000 years. But after breaking into the 5 aging processes, he returned. Perhaps he has died already. The two of them had no ill intentions at all and were even quite friendly to Zen. It was only after their conversation that they understood that Zen had come to participate in the passing the torch. Since you can participate in the passing the torch, you must be a warrior, who is highly valued by the 13 palaces. There would still be a long way to go in your life, so I suggest that you should not contemplate at the stone. That particular stone has a kind of enchanting magic, and once you are obsessed with it, you will be unable to extricate yourself from it without difficulty. I'm afraid that you will also waste your time on it like us by then, Landry warned. Since you know that it is just a waste of time, why haven't you left? Zen couldn't stop himself probing out of his curiosity. A bitter smile crept on Damien's face when he heard Zen's words. Ha ha, we have spent all these years here, but now you want us to leave. Doesn't it mean that all my previous efforts will be wasted? If truth be told, we also know that we can't obtain anything here, but so what if we refuse to leave? We can no longer engage in accomplishing some things and make great achievements in other respects too. So, we might as well hold on, and die here, Landry disclosed as he smiled helplessly. Zen hadn't been able to fathom it before. Since those warriors couldn't succeed in obtaining Supreme Lord Sword's inheritance, they could give up on it, but sadly, they didn't choose to give up. Now, he could deeply perceive how their mindsets worked. On the path of martial arts, perseverance was fundamentally the most important thing. A warrior, who could persist and endure, had firm determination and was highly resolute that he could succeed. Landry and Damien were both Spirit Supreme Realm warriors. Being inherently powerful, they could lead a decent life in high status in any sacred place of the upper world. Undoubtedly, the strength of will of these two definitely would never be weak. However, they had to find the right course to persist. If they maintained the wrong direction, they would be able to get further and further away from their goals. Landry and Damien fully knew that they were already in the wrong, but they had ignored it and continued to persist for too long. They had journeyed too far on this wrong route and were no longer able to turn back. After hearing the warning from the two seniors, Zen smiled and nodded. I understand. I merely pass by, and I am suddenly curious. I want to give it a try. That's good. Damien shook his head, and with a flip of his body, he quickly sat down in a large pit, causing the entire pit to sink 10 feet deep into the ground. Due to friction, its wall had become smooth, resembling a mirror, and Damien looked like he was inserted to it. This was the pit that Damien had quietly sat in to meditate for 20,000 years. Landry's figure also flashed as he sat down in another pit, staring at that huge stone with his eyes wide open as if he was battling with someone else. In an instant, the two of them had already entered a meditative state. Zen smiled slightly and raised his head to look at the huge stone again. After over 1 minute, some faint white sword shadows appeared in front of Zen's eyes again. As he became more and more focused, these sword shadows were also getting more and more real. At the start, there were just the white sword shadows, but after 15 minutes, the sword shadows were already like real swords. As these sword shadows became more real, Zen had the stronger feeling of being pierced when the sword shadows stabbed into his body and caused his heart to increasingly ache. But in fact it was just an illusion, and his body wasn't injured at all. Zen also tried to remind himself that it was just an illusion. However, this did not seem to be of any use. The pain seemed to be real. And every time a sword shadow stabbed into his body, it would make his heart twitch as if a sword was really thrust into him, but he wasn't injured. No, Zen's eyes flashed. He was firmly set that he could not let these white sword shadows bring him any pain. Thinking of this, Zen turned over and took out his Thunderwind Divine Sword. Bracing himself, he faced the incoming white sword shadows, and suddenly swung his sword through the air. Whoosh! Zen's sword intent swiftly erupted from the Thunderwind Divine Sword. At this moment, a very strange scene appeared. One white sword shadow directly swallowed Zen's sword intent. Afterward, the white sword shadow continued to rush towards Zen. As he was unable to avoid the attack, the sword shadow went straight into his body. Puff! At that moment, a muffled sound came from within Zen's body, and subsequently, he felt a sweet sensation in his throat as he spat out a mouthful of blood. This time, Zen was indeed injured. Although Landry and Damien were in a meditative state, their faces both wore strange expressions when they witnessed what had happened to Zen. In front of this massive stone, they had observed many hilarious things that had occurred since then. Some warriors swore that they saw the soul of Supreme Lord Sword. They even pretended to kneel and acknowledge him as their master, talking to him in the air. Some warriors even claimed that they were surrounded by a sword array. As long as they broke the sword array, they would be able to comprehend the swordsmanship of the Supreme Lord Sword. In short, all sorts of things had taken place there. And they had spotted many warriors like Zen, who incessantly waved their swords in front of the big words on the giant stone. Many warriors performed in front of the massive stone to show their swordsmanship. They seemed to want to use their skills to break the mystery of Supreme Lord Sword. However, in the end, it was proved to be their only wishful thinking. But now, Landry and Damien were curious as to why Zen was injured. How did he get hurt? The brush strokes reflected from the poem on the giant stone indeed made warriors feel very uncomfortable. But they would only feel that way and would not be injured. Those who were not accustomed to them, on the other hand, would even become restless when facing those words. But, once they got used to them, they would not have that terrible feeling anymore. How could anyone be hurt in this case? But it was incontestable that Zen vomited blood. This guy seems to be playing some tricks. He might have deliberately injured himself, but what's the use of playing this trick in front of us? The two of them quietly talked through the life vitality. They had encountered all kinds of things there before. They could be considered as the experienced elites. But after making a random deduction, they believed that Zen only pretended to do that in front of them and that he had purposefully spat out blood. They nonetheless failed to understand that there was no need for Zen to act like that in front of them. They had spent their entire lives there and it was of no value. Even though Zen's cultivation level was not high, he still had the qualifications to participate in the passing the torch, which meant that he was one of the remarkable warriors of 13 palaces and that he would surely have a promising future. Thus he didn't need to deceive Landry and Damien. Zen was naturally not clear about the thoughts of these two warriors, but his face revealed an unconvinced expression. He had just released a strand of sword intent, but it was swallowed again by the white sword shadow. Moreover, when the sword intent bounced back, it actually injured him, which meant that he was hurt by his own sword intent. Again, whoosh. This time, Zen did not send out the sword intent. Instead, he wrapped the sword intent around Thunderwind Divine Sword. And he patiently waited for the white sword shadow to approach. Then, he hit it with his sword. That white sword shadow was still an illusion, so when the two swords clashed, there was no sound at all. But this time, Zen's sword directly deflected the white sword shadow, but the white sword shadow circled and shot into Zen's body again. I can't block it, and it seems to be useless for me to do that, Zen thought, frowning. It seemed that even if he saw the white sword shadow, he wouldn't be able to do anything with it. Surprisingly, this time, Zen was not injured. Chapter 1048. Hone his sword intent. Countless warriors had spent years in this place but none had ever been successful in comprehending the mysteries behind it. Zen did not expect himself to comprehend anything at all in the short amount of time he was there. In all honesty, he didn't stay to comprehend anything, but he was just curious about the white sword shadows that had been left behind by Supreme Lord Sword. When he carved this poem, Supreme Lord Sword also inserted his insight of swordsmanship into the words. These words, inscribed with his insight, had constantly released white sword shadows for over 1,000,000 years now. But not everyone could see these sword shadows. Fortunately, Zen was able to see them with his concentration. He was able to resist these sword shadows using his own sword intent. He was still curious, however, and decided to try blocking them with his sword. To his surprise, the sword shadows quickly avoided his blade but still continued to dash towards him. It seemed that these white sword shadows couldn't be blocked. But Zen wasn't going to give up that easily. Again, he did not release his sword intent since doing so would cause the sword intent to be devoured by these white sword shadows. There was no doubt that he would suffer serious injuries if he wasn't careful. He had to take this seriously. He tried it once again. Using his 5-foot-long sword, Zen lightly blocked the white sword shadow. It quickly bounced off his blade but suddenly began spinning in the air and headed towards Zen once again. This was all according to plan. Once it got close, Zen swung the Thunderwind Divine Sword and flicked the white sword shadow away once again. And again, and again, and again. He did this for a couple more times, his sword brandishing blue sword flowers and deflecting the white sword shadow time and time again. A mere 3 seconds had passed and Zen had already deflected the sword shadow for a total of 7 times. After 7 hits, the white sword shadow stopped its attack and suddenly shattered. Zen's eyes widened in wonder, it broke. The white sword shadow shattered into hundreds of faint, light sparks that all floated in the air and shot towards Zen's body. Is it the sword spirit? He asked curiously. Sword spirit? Lavender, who was still inside his body, asked. Why can't I see it? Zen shrugged. I don't know. Not even Lavender seemed to be able to see the white sword shadows and the white light dots. It seemed Zen was the only one. And the white light dots that headed towards him didn't seem to be the sword spirit at all. Zen couldn't help but feel as if there was something terribly wrong. The poem etched onto the stone continued to emit countless sword shadows and one of them was aimed right at Zen. But after he shattered that one sword shadow, the others had strangely disappeared. He stared at the words etched on the stone and he couldn't help but feel an ominous foreboding in his mind. It wasn't just him, both Landry and Damien also felt that something was off. Of course, they couldn't see the white sword shadows. The reason why they felt something was terribly off was because the constant piercing sensation they had felt suddenly disappeared. Both of them had meditated in this place for tens of thousands of years, Landry for 60 and Damien for 20. During this time, there was no doubt that a lot of things had changed in the mortal world, nothing was constant in the way people lived after all. However, the only sure thing that never changed nor disappeared was the piercing sensation they constantly felt during their tens of thousands of years of meditation. Landon and Damien couldn't help but shoot confused looks at each other. They had always been able to feel the sharpness of the words through a constant stabbing pain in their hearts. But it suddenly disappeared with no warning. After tens of thousands of years of being subject to such a sensation, they couldn't help but feel a bit weird, not really used to being free of the piercing pain. What happened? Could it be that the words left behind by Supreme Lord Sword suddenly lost all power and momentum? Was that even possible? What's going on? This is impossible. Do you think this matter is related to that guy? Impossible. It couldn't be, but the pain is really gone. Their eyes were mirrors of disbelief. They had simply watched Zen perform ridiculous moves with his sword, wanting to see how long his strange performance was going to last. They didn't expect they would be affected in such a strange, sudden way. They couldn't find any other explanation other than the fact that this was most probably related to Zen. Just as they looked to the youth for answers, Zen had suddenly turned around and ran away at an extremely fast rate, surprising the two Spirit Supreme Realm warriors. What is he doing? I haven't got the slightest idea. Unbeknownst to them, Zen was currently running for his life. The words on the huge stone hadn't lost any of their momentum or power. In fact, white sword shadows had suddenly shot out from the stone and all flew towards Zen. It seemed his earlier actions irritated someone. But all he did was to block and shatter a tiny white sword shadow. Was there really a need to attack him all at once? He had no idea what just happened. All he knew was that he had to get away from this horde of white sword shadows that chased him. He didn't know how, but every time he got stabbed by one of them, his heart would feel this intense, piercing pain. If all of these white sword shadows stabbed him all at once, he wasn't sure if he would survive the amount of pain they would bring him. There was no way he was going to let that happen. The only thing he could do now was to run. Whoosh! He rushed with great speed, but the white sword shadows weren't lacking in agility. Despite doing his best to escape, Zen was soon taken over by the onslaught of these white sword shadows that quickly overwhelmed him. The initial wave of attacks shot a stabbing pain to his heart. It wasn't long before the pain became too much and he felt as if his heart was going to explode. The pain had paralyzed him, sapping him of the strength to flee. There was no more hope to escape as hundreds of white sword shadows pierced into his body. His eyes rolled to the back of his head as he fainted and fell from the sky. However, just before he hit the ground, Lavender shot out from his body to catch him. There had been no need, given that Zen's body would have surely survived the fall. However, Lavender decided to still come out at the last moment and break his fall. She gently placed him on the ground and observed his face. It seems that the sword spirit has become stronger, she murmured. The sword spirit belonged to Zen. Lavender's soul was merely attached to it. However, Zen had also given Lavender complete control, which meant that the sword spirit's body could now be considered her temporary shell. He had never paid attention to his sword spirit, but it seemed that it had gotten stronger, as Lavender had said. Now that she was stronger, Lavender realized that there was no longer any need for her to be attached to the sword spirit. It only served as a hiding place for her now, since she had gotten used to using it as her shell. Looking at it now though, she couldn't help but wonder how Zen was able to strengthen it. Did something happen during the time he spent blindly swinging his sword in the air? Thankfully, the young man quickly came to. The piercing pain he had felt was only illusory and did not really have the capacity to cause any physical harm to his body. Lavender, he called out, seeing her beside him. You seem to have honed your sword intent just now, she told him. But Zen scratched his head. I'm not really sure, he said. The image of the white sword shadows crossed his mind, but he felt a bit scared just thinking about it. I've become stronger. Lavender smiled at Zen. The wording wasn't really correct. Lavender's soul was at a level that the sword spirit couldn't hope to match. It was Zen's sword spirit that became stronger and not really Lavender, but she still said it for the heck of it. Ah, Zen murmured, and the weird foreboding feeling still hadn't left him. The aura released by the sword spirit seemed sharper and more forceful. It did not come from Lavender's soul at all, but from the sword spirit itself. Still, he smiled back at Lavender. Indeed, it seems I can hone my sword intent by using the white sword shadows. Though his sword intent had reached the consummate level, it was not yet at its limit. Back when he entered the Killing Sword Mountain, Zen had only inserted his sword into the mountainside. It was good that he was able to strengthen his sword spirit, but the white sword shadows still made him feel queasy inside. Did the path towards becoming stronger entail so much suffering? It seems so. Chapter 1049. My heart is going to explode. Zen did not expect himself to solve the mystery left behind by Supreme Lord Sword. That was giving way too much credit to his abilities. These white sword shadows had indeed proven useful in improving the strength of his sword spirit. However, they also gave Zen extreme pain. Every time a white sword shadow passed through his body, his heart would suffer this intense, piercing pain. After being subject to the attack of thousands of white sword shadows, he was surprised that his heart was still intact since he felt as if it was going to explode. Still, he had been through worse. The piercing sensation in his heart was nothing compared to the excruciating pain he had experienced when he replaced his life energy with chaotic energy. There was no way he was going to back down just because of a little pain. Zen returned to the site of the huge rock but was surprised to see the two Spirit Supreme Realm warriors staring at him as he approached. These two originally sported benign faces but now looked as if they were about to murder him. You what did you do? Landry asked with a trembling voice. How did you do it? What have you done? How did you make the feeling disappear? Damien asked as well. Their eyes glazed over, making the two of them look like mad beasts who had been shaken out of their peaceful abodes. The two of them had spent tens of thousands of years meditating on this spot, dreaming that one day they would form some sort of magical connection with the words etched on the giant stone. The giant stone had been there long before the two of them. It had been subject to the weathering of the elements but still emitted a fierce aura that remained unchanged despite the passage of time. However, Zen suddenly arrived and enacted such a strange change to this place. How could they remain calm? These two had spent their lives meditating, therefore, their physical strength was far inferior to other average Spirit Supreme Realm warriors. Their minds had also lost all hunger for blood and had been conditioned for peace. However, this change made their emotions bubble up to the surface. Supreme Lord Sword was one that could battle with true gods after all. The swordsmanship he left behind was powerful enough to defeat a deity, so long as one was able to comprehend it. The two Spirit Supreme Realm warriors had spent all this time in this effort trying to unlock the mysteries of this technique. Whatever they sought to gain, they understood that they would have to pay for. However, the sudden arrival of this newcomer had thrown everything off balance. I didn't do anything, Zen quickly claimed. Impossible, you better tell us the truth. Do you think we were born yesterday? Who are you fooling? The two of them had initially chosen to watch calmly on the side. They didn't really think Zen would be able to comprehend anything nor make such a dramatic change to this place. However, the sudden disappearance of the piercing pain in their hearts changed everything. Their faces were now filled with malice. Zen was alarmed by their accusations but could definitely understand where they were coming from. These two had spent their entire lives here as if they were guarding a huge treasure trove for years. However, he had suddenly come and triggered some strange phenomena. He might not have solved the mystery left behind by Supreme Lord Sword, but he still did something. It would be strange for these two to not react this way. A fight didn't worry him. Zen knew Yolanda was nearby, so starting a fight with him would be courting death for these two. Also, they were acting this way because of their heightened emotions, but there was no trace of killing intent from any of them. Truth be told, Zen pitied them a bit. I swear I didn't do anything. I just saw these weird sword shadows and broke a few into pieces. After that, it became like this, he explained. There was no need to hide anything since he had already mentioned this to Yolanda and Layla. However, none of them believed him. Sword shadows. What do these sword shadows look like? Zen tried to explain with his hands, but at that moment, he felt the familiar piercing sensation in his heart. The sword shadows seemed to have appeared once again, he said with a wince. It wasn't just him, the two Spirit Supreme Realm Masters felt it too. It seemed the words on the giant rock had gone back to normal. So all these years, that piercing pain in our hearts was caused by the sword shadows. Why can't I see them? Why can't I see them? They muttered to themselves, feeling depressed. Zen couldn't really be bothered to answer but did wonder why these two men were so bothered by the sword shadows. It was as if they were so desperate to see these sword shadows as well. At that moment, a white sword shadow flew towards him. Zen raised his Thunderwind Divine Sword and his sword intent circled around the blade as he slashed towards the sword shadow 7 times. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The white sword shadow shattered after 7 strikes, just as he expected. However, after shattering one sword shadow, the rest immediately flew towards him once again. This time, Zen did not resist. He knew trying to run away from these sword shadows was futile, so he might as well go all out and practice his sword intent. He held the sword straight in front of him and placed his other hand on the blade. The white sword shadows surged like a tidal wave, but Zen's eyes held a deadly seriousness in them. With the approach of thousands of these faint lights, he he let out a cry and struck out with his sword. Zen did not release the law power within the Thunder Wind Divine Sword. He merely activated his sword intent as he wildly waved the sword in his hand while firmly standing his ground. From a mortal's perspective, they wouldn't see Zen's hand nor his sword. All they would be able to see were the fluttering shadows of his sleeve and the blue flashes of his sword. His movements were too swift and the scene would be too much for a normal person's eyes to bear. Whoosh! Strong gales of wind rolled out from his sleeve as Zen tried to fight off the constant tirade of white sword shadows. The Thunder Wind Divine Sword proved to be effective in repelling these sword shadows, but they merely spun and shot back towards Zen, causing the warrior to exert more effort in fighting them off. Fortunately, 7 strikes were all it took to shatter these white sword shadows. As the sword shadows shattered into thousands of faint pieces, they all quickly rushed into his body and merged with his sword spirit. However, there were just too many of these white sword shadows and Zen's strength had already reached its limit. He was initially able to fight them off but quickly fell short of strength. It wasn't long before Zen was submerged under a tidal wave of these sword shadows. Unfortunately, that meant he was once again subject to unbearable, piercing pain. "My heart is going to explode," he thought, his eyes rolling to the back of his head before fainting. Lavender once again came out of his body as soon as he passed out. She turned to the 2 warriors in front of him and glared coldly at them. She took it as her responsibility to protect him during this period of vulnerability. Even if she was a mere soul, her current soul was already at the Silver Fighting Soul realm, which meant she could still face off against these 2 warriors at the Spirit Supreme realm. She vigilantly kept her guard up in case these 2 ever decided to attack. Meanwhile, both Landry and Damien stared blankly at Zen's unconscious form. They were certain that Zen had uncovered a few mysteries, but neither of them could find out what. They were so desperate for answers, almost on the brink of losing their minds, but they knew it wouldn't end well for them if they hurt a martial artist of the 13 Palaces. It hadn't been easy ever since the Willow Island became the 13 Palaces' territory to hold the passing the torch. The 2 of them had paid a large amount to bribe those in charge to let them stay in this spot. Laying a single hand on Zen's head would mean courting death, as all the powerful warriors of the 13 Palaces had now gathered in the Willow Island. Instead of harming him, perhaps they could work with him. When Zen comprehended the mysteries of Supreme Lord Sword, maybe they could get a share of the mysteries as well. They were going nuts with all the thoughts that were going through their heads, but they had to fight off the impulse of kidnapping Zen and forcing him to spill his secrets. A moment later, however, Zen finally came to. After that last round, his sword spirit had now become even more powerful. It was not impossible to block these white sword shadows, and this fact fired Zen up for the next fight. "I'll practice it again," he roared, readily approaching the torrential wave of the white sword shadows. He slashed out 7 times with his sword, the sword shadows were activated and came at him like a torrent once again, and he was once again submerged by them. He was able to hold on for a few seconds longer this time before fainting once again after his heart reached its breaking point. It was a cycle of fighting, being submerged by the white sword shadows, fainting from the pain, and waking up once again. Lavender, his sword spirit, on the other hand, was continuously growing stronger at a visible rate. Zen could also feel that his sword intent had changed once again. Chapter 1050, Crack. A drop of sweat ran down Zen's forehead. After a long and arduous process, his consummate sword intent was almost perfect now. There seemed to be ample streams of consummate sword intent cyclones, which Zen had often seen before. This consummate sword intent had almost reached perfection, and looked like it was impossible to advance it any further. But just in a split second, Zen was shocked to discover that his consummate sword intent suddenly became extremely unstable. In the past, Zen could easily release the sword intent with just a thought, as if it only came from his arm. However, Zen now felt that it was quite hard to control, even if the faint sword intent that lingered around his long sword had gotten increasingly powerful. Therefore, the whirlwind formed by the sword intent wasn't enough anymore. It suddenly became fidgety like a snake and constantly jumped around Zen's sword. To put it simply, instead of becoming stronger, the sword intent only became worse. Zen's lips curled down into a frown. Why did the sword intent suddenly become like this? He complained. While honing the sword intent with the help of the white sword shadows did greatly enhance the sword spirit, Zen now found it difficult to control the sword intent. There was a slight trace of hesitation on Zen's face. Should he continue this? While his eyes roamed around the scattered white shadows, he felt his determination rise up again. Zen was the type of person that once he set out to do something, he would do his best. Giving up halfway simply wasn't in him. Thus, he decided to see how his sword intent would develop at this rate. At this stage, Zen's sword intent was impossibly strong, but he managed to suppress it by force. In addition, the speed at which the white shadows were being chopped down had increased much greater as the sword intent became even sharper. It was a good progress, and it was now possible for Zen to shatter the white sword shadows in about 4 sword strikes instead of the usual 7. It didn't come a surprise for Zen to hit hundreds of white sword shadows with his sword when he faced a torrent of them. And true to his prediction, he had done the job in just 4 consecutive strikes. The gray, rocky surface of the stone seemed to mirror Zen's mood. His feet ached slightly as he had been standing in front of it for 4 hours. As he tried his best to kill the white sword shadows, Yolanda's voice reverberated throughout the area. "Zen, are you still contemplating the words on the huge stone? The passing the torch is about to begin," she said in a faint voice. Her question was met with a slight pause. "Can you wait a bit longer?" Zen finally responded. "Sure I can, but we'll have to hold the first round of the test after the passing the torch begins. You should come over as soon as possible." The disciples of 13 palaces were still required to undergo a test together. If Zen would be late for the test, he might be ranked last. In addition, the stone inscriptions of the original law would be distributed after the assessment. It might have an influence on Zen if he were the last person to choose a stone inscription. However, there was a slight problem. Zen had no time to attend the examination at this moment. The Thunderwind Divine Sword in his hand danced in a progressively swift manner as the sword intent became sharper and sharper. Whoosh! Alas, Zen became a little careless and the sword intent that lingered around the sword suddenly shot out. It dashed quickly like a passing comet and shattered a dozen white sword shadows. Then it entered straight inside the nearby desert, and left behind a tiny crack. Naturally, losing his sword intent meant that Zen couldn't resist the white sword shadows, and before he could condense another sword intent, those white sword shadows engulfed him once again. Bright light entered Zen's eyelids as he blinked repeatedly. He had apparently passed out for a bit, but he stood up and fought the white shadows once again. Zen grew braver in each passing second of the fight. 2 strenuous hours later, Zen only needed 3 sword strikes to finish each of the white sword shadows. Another 2 hours had passed, and Zen needed just 2 strikes now. In the next 2 hours, Zen didn't faint again. Not a single one of the endless white sword shadows had broken through his sword flowers, and he had successfully chopped all of them off. However, Zen had failed to control his sword intent this time. Although he tried his best to maneuver it on the sword blade, it shot out every 9 seconds every time he condensed a new sword intent. At least now, the white shadows could no longer devour his sword intent. It would cause Zen serious injuries or even death if the shadows were still able to do that. However, Zen's failure to control his own sword intent had made him upset. He could make hundreds of sword strikes in 9 seconds, but he had to quickly condense a sword intent in that time frame as well. At this rate, he would quickly run out of his body's chaotic energy. If his belly had contained life vitality, he probably would have replenished over 1,000 supreme life vitality crystals. Nevertheless, he was lucky that his body had chaotic energy in it. A wisp of it would suffice for now. Meanwhile, Landry and Damien watched Zen practice his sword in awe. They just sat there, motionless and full of admiration for a few hours. Although they didn't understand what was happening, they felt that something was about to come. They kept their eyes firmly fixed on Zen as they didn't want to miss anything. If Zen revealed the secret of Supreme Lord Sword, then they would have a chance to take action. It had been another hour since Zen had continuously cut the white sword shadows, and then he suddenly stood still. His sword intent suddenly shot out, but there was no newly formed sword intent this time, as no sword shadows had erupted from the large swords on the huge stone. What happened? Why there are no sword shadows? Zen eyed the large words in curiosity and said, "Aren't there enough sword shadows? I don't know how many white sword shadows I have shattered." He tried to trace back what happened. In the past few hours, Zen had smashed countless white sword shadows. However, what Zen didn't know was that he had cut 960,000 white sword shadows during that time. In the past, the sharp sword intent was left on the words when Supreme Lord Sword carved the words with his sword. What pierced into the warriors' hearts were these very white sword shadows. There were originally 990,000 white sword shadows in total, but there had been too many warriors in the past millions of years who had come here to comprehend the stone in this place. While they weren't as powerful as Zen who could see the white sword shadows, some of them still accidentally shattered some of the sword shadows. Thus, it had made the other white sword shadows to attack them and make them faint. However, only a few warriors had actually done that. Even those who had noticed the sword shadows only thought that they couldn't withstand the heart-piercing, pain, and would be ridiculed by the others. Zen, however, was the complete opposite. He had now shattered all of the white sword shadows and his sword intent had reached its maximum peak. It was true that he couldn't control this sword intent, but it was powerfully sharp and fierce. It seemed like Supreme Lord Sword arranged this so that he could hone his sword intent. But why did he create such a strange sword intent? Zen thought. At that point, Lavender decided to move. Her graceful body had left Zen's own, and she now stood by his side. After that, she scanned her own body as well. Aside from the fact that Zen's sword intent had become so sharp and uncontrollable, the sword spirit body had also undergone a tremendous change. The sword spirit was just an illusion at the beginning. Although Lavender looked exactly like an ordinary person, she actually looked a bit different from an actual human on a closer look. She was like a reflection in water while floating in the air. The strong light could even penetrate her body. However, at present, if Lavender didn't tell anyone that she was a sword spirit, nobody could know the truth. She looked just like a real body. From her flowing black hair to her snow-white skin, her whole body looked so vivid and lifelike. She was no different from an ordinary person, and her body looked convincingly solid. She slightly raised her wrist and lightly touched her arm. It seems that the sword spirit body becomes real. And when I control this sword spirit body, my strength will increase by a lot as well, she said with a faint smile. Back when she didn't have a vessel, she had still liked to rely on Zen's body. It could be said that she wasn't that motivated to find a body for herself. Now that this had happened, Lavender thought that she had also made a good choice in life when she accompanied Zen. Meanwhile, Zen glanced at Lavender. He felt his heart race at the sight of her glossy hair and fair face. However, he soon turned back his attention towards the enormous stone. It looked like there was no way to reveal the secret left behind by Supreme Lord Sword. It had taken him several hours to strengthen his sword spirit to such an extent. This was already considered a good harvest. As for figuring out the secret of Supreme Lord Sword, that was something that could just depend on one's luck. Zen would not persist. In addition, the passing the torch had already begun, so Zen wasted no time and flew towards one side of the huge stone. Not long after Zen left, the two Spirit Supreme Realm warriors, Landry and Damien, were still blankly focused on the huge words on the stone. Suddenly, a slight rupturing sound came from one of the words, and a crack appeared. Chapter 1051. The Purification Pool. The mood of the two warriors was extremely complicated. They discovered that the sharp sword intent contained within the words had completely disappeared. The source of this problem must be Zen. They could not think of anyone else. But they did not dare stop Zen and force him to reveal the truth. Moreover, he probably did not know what the truth was. It was possible that he was unaware of what he'd done. Therefore, they could only watch Zen's retreating figure and continue to stare at the words on the giant rock in a daze. After losing the sharp sword intent, these large characters lost their charm although they still looked the same as before. Even the brush edges of the characters were no longer sharp and forceful. If someone had said that this poem was carved by a Supreme Lord, the onlookers would have nodded in agreement. After all, only a Supreme Lord could carve such sharp characters. But now, if others were to see it, they would think that it was carved by an ordinary craftsman. There was nothing special or extraordinary about it. It almost looked disappointing, if they were being completely honest. That brat took away the charm in those characters. What exactly is going on? Landry asked with a sullen face. Damien shook his head, his expression dispirited. Right at this moment, a crack suddenly appeared on one of the characters. The two men were shocked. This huge rock had never been damaged by anyone before. But a crack appeared just now. Wasn't this extremely abnormal? The two of them looked at each other with excitement written all over their faces. They were the only two among the countless warriors that had stayed here to the end. Perhaps what was happening in front of them was the turning point in their fates. Meanwhile, Zen did not know that the characters cracked after he left. When he arrived at his destination, he saw magnificent ancient buildings that stood there for countless years. Yolanda and a couple dozen other people were waiting in this place. Yolanda, there is still one more person from the Mist Palace who has yet to come. It has already been several hours. If he still hasn't arrived, then I'll have to seal the purification pool," said an old man dressed in cotton clothes. He had an impatient expression on his face. To any warrior of the 13 palaces, passing the torch was a great fortune. But there was actually someone who was yet to arrive, and it was unknown just what he was waiting for. The old man grew frustrated and angry. Yolanda shrugged and said, "Just wait." A tall and slim woman dressed in jade green sneered. "Tisk, tisk." Yolanda, I'm so envious of you. If it were someone from other palaces, I'm afraid the purification pool would have already been sealed. This time, all the leaders of the 13 palaces had rushed over from 13 different supreme worlds to participate in passing the torch. The woman dressed in jade green was the leader of the Shadow Palace. Actually, what she said was right. The old man was very impatient, and he hated those who were late. According to the rules, he would seal the purification pool even if someone had been late for only 5 minutes. But Zen had already been late for several hours now. As much as he wanted to seal the purification pool, he couldn't do so because Yolanda was the daughter of a supreme lord. He had no choice but to wait against his will. At this time, another warrior also said to Yolanda, "Why do you want to wait for this guy, Yolanda? I don't think it's a big deal if he misses it. Could it be that there's something really special about him? I can't think of any other reason why we are waiting for him for this long." There were hundreds of warriors in each palace participating in passing the torch. When the other 12 leaders saw that Yolanda insisted on waiting for Zen, they became very interested in his identity. They wanted to know his background and true power. There was definitely something that Yolanda was keeping from them. Yolanda pursed her lips. Deep in her heart, she had high hopes for Zen. However, since she knew that Zen had his own fate, she would not interfere with his thoughts. She would just let him do whatever he wanted. She wondered if he had succeeded in comprehending Supreme Lord Sword's sword intent. "Yolanda, why is that brat so late? Shouldn't he have come with you?" Another person asked. "There are so many leaders here, yet we are waiting for a mere disciple. Do you think this is appropriate?" According to the rules, this place had to be sealed once all the participants entered. Since Zen was still not here, the place couldn't be sealed. These people were all leaders and very proud. How could they not be angry when they had been delayed by a mere disciple? To them, this was utter disrespect. That brat might be trying to comprehend that poem of Supreme Lord Sword. It would take thousands of years. It was Timothy, the vice leader of the Mist Palace, who spoke. Hearing Timothy's words, many palace leaders had strange expressions on their faces as they all stared at Yolanda in disbelief. These palace leaders all heard of the mysteries of Supreme Lord Sword. Whether or not it was a scam, they had their own opinions. But they believed that smarter warriors would never waste their entire lives on it. "Ha ha, I never thought that there would be such a stupid guy in the Mist Palace. He actually believes in the secret of Supreme Lord Sword," a palace master exclaimed, laughing. Another palace leader sneered and said to Yolanda, "It can't be that you want us to wait for 1,000 years, right?" Of course, this was a sarcastic remark. Yolanda was furious, but she could only urge Zen with her life vitality. Before she could speak, though, a figure had already rushed over from the horizon. When she saw Zen coming, Yolanda let out a sigh of relief and said, "He's already here." Swoosh. After Zen landed, he cupped his hands towards Yolanda and said, "My apologies for the long wait." Yolanda nodded her head slightly, but before she could say anything, the old man spoke. "Long wait, humph, you don't have the qualifications to make us wait for you." His tone was quite unkind, but Zen was indeed late and didn't say much. What the old man said was right, after all. As a mere life and death realm warrior, he didn't have the qualifications to inconvenience these people, let alone make them wait. The other palace leaders and vice palace leaders also furrowed their brows as they stared at Zen. They had not expected that after waiting for so long, they would only see a warrior at the 5th grade of the life and death realm. Was there really no other talent in the Mist Palace? Or was it because he had some sort of special background? "Since you're here, hurry and enter the purification pool," Yolanda said in a low voice. "The others have already left for a few hours. You are already far behind." Zen nodded his head and looked in the direction Yolanda was pointing at. He saw a circular pool. There was clear water in this pool, so clear that the bottom could be seen. The aura that was being emitted from this pool reminded Zen of the ascending well he had stayed in before. Everyone was urging him to get a move on and Zen was unwilling to make things difficult for Yolanda any more than he already had. Without further ado, he jumped into the purification pool so fast that his figure appeared to have flashed right before everyone's eyes. But the moment he jumped in, he discovered that the clear water in the pool wasn't as simple as it seemed. The resistance of the clear water was much greater than he had imagined. After he jumped in, he expected that he would sink, but he remained on the surface of the pool. Seeing Zen having trouble with it, Yolanda said, "You can sink down. The purification pool will help clear up your soul for a short period of time and increase your perception by several folds." What Zen didn't know was that the warriors from the 13 palaces had had a round of competition in the purification pool. The purification pool's water buoyancy was extremely great. It was only 20 feet wide and 20 feet deep, yet it was already this resistant. If its area was expanded by several times, even a mountain range would still be unable to sink down. Many warriors were proud about being able to sink to the bottom so as to show their strength. But this was not such an easy feat. Most of the warriors in the 13 palaces couldn't sink to the bottom of the purification pool, and most of them only stayed in the middle section. Of course, the 13 palaces didn't lack powerful warriors. Just like Layla, Javier, and the other warriors, they had seamlessly sunk to the bottom. There were more than 10 warriors in the 13 palaces that were able to overcome the challenge. In truth, it didn't matter whether or not one was able to sink to the bottom. This was only a way for warriors of the 13 palaces to compete with each other. "Young man, you can try and see how deep you can go," a palace leader said to Zen with a smile. Zen looked at Yolanda. "Is it really that important to sink to the bottom?" he mouthed. Seeing that Yolanda shook her head slightly, Zen did not bother to pay attention to the palace leader who had just spoken to him. With a flip of his body, he entered the purification pool without sinking to the bottom. The palace leaders, including the old man who just offered him a smile, started to frown in disappointment. What a huge letdown this was. They had waited for a very long time only for the sake of this guy. Chapter 1052, Law Storm. The purification pool was also a place to gauge the strength of martial artists of the 13 palaces. In the previous few hours, thousands of cultivators had jumped into the pool and made a show of their abilities. The pool was an important aspect of passing the torch. The leaders also informed the warriors of their own palaces to exhibit their strength. Among the warriors of the 13 palaces, Layla from Mist Palace had previously sunk into the bottom of the purification pool the fastest and the most effortlessly. In just a few seconds, she had quietly sunk 20 feet into the depths of the purification pool. The resistance of the water in the purification pool seemed not to hinder her in any way. Zen was also from Mist Palace, but he had arrived late. In the end, he had not put up an extraordinary show. Whether or not Zen used his full strength, he was floating at such a shallow depth right now that he could only be ranked below average with his current performance, or even among the most incompetent martial artists of the 13 palaces. I was wondering what kind of an extraordinary talent he was. It seemed I have waited in vain. The boy could not be so intelligent since he actually believed the mystery left behind by Supreme Lord Sword. All right, we can seal off the path of passing the torch now. I still want to check on how the little ones in my palace are doing. Some of the leaders of the palaces were dissatisfied when they heard the announcement. The voices passed through the clear pool of water and reached Zen's ears, but he looked calm and indifferent. It was then that he noticed Yolanda looking at him. He grinned at her. The two of them smiled at each other knowingly at the same time, neither of them knowing what the other was so amused about. After that, Zen turned back to what he had to face. Immersing himself in the water of the pool, Zen felt his spirit become more refreshed. He became quicker in thinking. As Zen left the purification pool, the old man in the cotton clothes clapped his hands. A huge word, seal, appeared in the sky. When the word appeared, it immediately locked them out from the orange sea world on the outside. It was as if an independent space had formed within the scope of the word. What a powerful technique! Zen was somewhat surprised to see the old man's skills. This old man in cotton clothes must be halfway into becoming a world lord, or at least had the strength equivalent to that of one. The great theurgy he had displayed through his cultivation amazed Zen. After the path to passing the torch was sealed off, Zen followed the crowd and entered a square. A few square stones were placed in the square. Each of the stones was about 2 feet in length and was engraved with densely packed words the size of mosquitoes or flies. At the end of the square were thousands of warriors sitting on the side. They held a square stone carving in their hands, contemplating on the contents with their heads lowered. You, choose a stone carving yourself. Go sit over there and meditate. The old man in the cotton clothes said coldly. Zen had not left a good impression on this old man. Naturally, the latter did not sound pleasant while talking to him. At the moment, Yolanda was looking at the few stone carvings scattered on the square. She said to Zen, "The stone carvings that are easy to comprehend have all been taken away. The remaining ones might be very difficult to understand." There had originally been thousands of stone carvings at this square and the difficulty level of these were also varied. The few stone carvings that were left over were the relatively complicated ones. Zen nodded before walking off into the square. His eyes began to sweep over the stone carvings. As Zen's gaze immediately moved across the area, his eyes suddenly flashed. Isn't what is recorded on these stone carvings the law power? He wondered. Soon after, he walked toward a stone carving and lowered his head to carefully examine it. This is the power of the 4 layers of the metal law. Zen had comprehended 3 layers of 8 law powers, but he had not comprehended the 4th layer of each law. However, it was not that Zen could not find the 4th layer of the laws to comprehend, it was just that he did not have enough time to do so. It would take a lot of time and energy to comprehend the 4th layer of the laws, even if Zen had experienced the baptism by laws. No, this isn't the pure power of the metal law. Zen's eyes flashed in confusion. There were a total of 6 sides on this square stone carving. The central part of each side contained a type of law power. So, the entire stone carving contained 6 kinds of law power. However, at a juncture where 2 types of law power overlapped, they would fuse together. How does one comprehend 6 kinds of law power at the same time? Zen was deeply curious. What exactly the passing the torch aimed to test in the warriors? Zen held the stone carving in his hand and walked to a corner of the square. He planned to sit down to study the stone carving. But as he walked over, Layla suddenly waved at him, shouting, "Zen, this way." Her voice was dynamic and pleasant to the ear, but the rest of the square was quiet. None of the thousands of martial artists ever made a sound when they were so completely focused on comprehending the stone carvings in their hands. Anyone who spoke with such a loud voice certainly disturbed the others. However, this was how Layla was like. When she had first entered Mist Palace, she immediately used the Tiger Roar token. She never cared how the other warriors at the palace felt. However, her performance in the purification pool had attracted the attention of the martial artists of the younger generation from the 13 palaces. She had been most outstanding in the purification pool and could be considered their biggest competitor in passing the torch. In private, many warriors had investigated on Layla and learned about her background. Moreover, she was such a beauty that some of the male martial artists were very attentive toward her. Therefore, her loud clamor did not cause any public reaction. Previously, many warriors who had been keeping an eye on Layla realized that she had saved a place for someone beside her, but they did not know for whom. Now, everyone finally knew that it was for Zen. For the moment, all eyes were fixed on Zen. When they found out that Zen was only at the life and death realm, their expressions varied. Disdain, contempt, curiosity, and other feelings were obvious on their faces, but none of the warriors looked very friendly. It was not like there were no other life and death realm warriors here, but most of them were at the 9th level. They were all on the brink of reaching the 10th level of the life and death realm. Those warriors were no weaker than those at the Soul Sea realm. Someone at the 5th level of the life and death realm, however, was too ordinary. He was not worth their attention at all. Why would Layla reserve a spot for someone like him? He did not deserve it. Zen felt helpless as he read their unfriendly faces. It's not me who made a ruckus, so why does it feel like everyone is blaming me? He thought bitterly. He ignored Layla and sat down in the corner he had chosen. But he did not know how stubborn Layla could be. Seeing that Zen ignored her and sat by himself in a corner, she raised her voice even more. "Zen, come over here. I have something to ask you." Hearing this, Zen was speechless. He lowered his head and began to contemplate the laws on the stone carving. He knew how infuriating the woman could be. He was in no mood to bother with her. Layla saw that Zen did not react as if he had not heard her at all. She carried her own stone carving and stood up. Walking past the warriors, she crossed half of the square to reach Zen's side. She gently lifted up the hem of her dress and sat with her knees on the ground. After placing the stone carving beside her, she asked him, "I'm talking to you, can't you hear me?" "I heard you," Zen replied indifferently as he read the laws of the stone carving. "So then why didn't you respond?" Layla persisted. Zen shrugged. "No reason, I just didn't feel like it." "Why? I don't remember doing anything to irritate you." Seeing Zen's perfunctory attitude, Layla did not relent. Zen suddenly felt a headache coming. He just hoped that she would not make a commotion just to disturb him, but he was not a man who could be rude to a woman. He exhaled and stared at Layla. "All right, what do you want to ask me?" Layla rolled her eyes at him before asking with a smile, "What did you figure out from the words Supreme Lord Sword left behind?" Zen shook his head. "There are people who haven't comprehended anything after having meditated for tens of thousands of years. What secrets can I figure out?" "You haven't figured out anything, yet you have stayed there for so long." Layla continued, baffled. She would not stop nagging him. Zen could not help but roll his eyes heavenward. "Could you stop talking, please? I still need to contemplate on this stone carving." He had already been late here for a few hours, and now that Layla kept pestering him non-stop, Zen was unable to contain his frustration any longer. "Oh, Layla wore a resentful look on her face. In fact, if you want to comprehend the 6 kinds of law power on the stone carving, you need plenty of time. The law storm is a fusion of many different law powers, so the more you comprehend now, the further you will go. Law storm. Hearing this, Zen raised his head. Layla knew that he would be curious about that, so she smiled, choosing to keep him in suspense. Don't you wish to figure out the stone carving by yourself? Why are you asking me? Chapter 1053. The Enchanted Barrier Tower. Layla had finally succeeded in arousing Zen's curiosity, and her face now revealed a complacent smile. She then raised one corner of her mouth in a meaningful way and smiled. You said that you don't want to say anything and just want to focus on studying the stone carving, right? In response, Zen merely glared at her with a cold gaze. He seemed to dislike being kept in suspense. Layla seemed to sense that and stopped beating around the bush. The most important part in the passing the torch is to advance through the law storm. The storm is formed of every single law power in the entire universe and can be a bit feisty. Every single type of law is contained in the storm. Zen confirmed. Layla nodded. Yes, but don't worry, those laws are extremely fragmented, left behind by numerous supreme lords as they fought in the past. The law storm is imprisoned within the Enchanted Barrier Tower. The Enchanted Barrier Tower had also been left behind by a supreme lord. In appearance, it was much like a tower, but was in fact an enchanted barrier. It had been created many years ago and things were much different now. Several supreme lords had fought in the Orange Sea world, which ended up disintegrating this supreme world. As a result, the laws left behind by them had become disordered and uncontrolled, making the Orange Sea world a dangerous and chaotic place. Any warrior visiting it would be dead within seconds if he or she wasn't careful enough and got trapped in the chaotic law current. Later, a human supreme lord had taken a planned risk and gathered all of the law currents together, trapping and enveloping them within the Enchanted Barrier Tower. The broken Orange Sea world gradually became peaceful after that. The chaotic law currents within the Enchanted Barrier Tower had also weakened over time, losing much of their energy. Later on, they interacted and formed a storm. But time had passed so much since then that even the storms might had weakened by a great deal. In the last several hundred years, it had weakened enough to be used as a method of testing the warriors of 13 palaces. After hearing Layla's instructions, Zen understood what was going on. No wonder the warriors of 13 palaces were required to comprehend those stone carvings. They had 6 types of laws on each of their 6 sides. The law storm was actually a combination of many different original laws, which meant that in order to resist it, they needed to comprehend a sufficient amount of law power. So we are going to make an effort at the last moment, huh? It would be useless, you know. Even if we spend 20 days cultivating here, it won't be enough. Forget about 40 hours. If you want to make greater achievement in the law storm, you will have to rely on your accumulation of knowledge and cultivation base in the past. Layla told him arrogantly. Zen glanced at her indifferently, realizing that she was both proud and confident in herself. Even so, I have to do what I have to do, Zen responded. Look, I told you, it's just useless. Like I said, I don't need to comprehend this stone carving. I can surely obtain first place and break the record here without doing that. Let's just chat. Layla smiled. Zen rolled his eyes in response. Layla, I'm not as confident as you are. After he finished speaking, he didn't raise his head anymore and instead concentrated on observing the stone carving in his hand. He was going to ignore her if she kept on nagging him like that. When Layla saw that Zen was ignoring her, a resentful expression once again appeared on her face. However, after a second thought, her smile returned. She was very confident in herself. She also knew that Zen would surely be very dejected if he could not perform better than her in the test after he had tried to contemplate the stone carving so earnestly. Zen could clearly understand what Layla was thinking about, but he just kept on staring intently at the stone carving, deep in thought. If all the 6 law powers were fused together at the same time, what effect would that lead to? Zen had already seen the perfect fusion of 2 kinds of law power before. For example, Fenton's sword art was a perfect fusion of the metal law and the wind law. However, it was already extremely hard to fuse even 2 of the original laws together, let alone all 6 of them. Some of the original laws reinforced, and some of them restricted each other. For example, the fire law and water law were exact opposites. Their restraints on each other were the most obvious among the laws of 5 elements. But was there really no one in this world who could mix all kinds of law power together? Of the 6 kinds of law power on this stone carving, the fusions were pairwise. Moreover, the fusions of any 2 laws weren't complete. Further, Zen still didn't know how powerful that law storm was. He couldn't imagine what would happen if several different kinds of laws came together and acted on a single point, but he could obtain the fusion method from the stone carving. Very quickly, Zen entered a state of immersion. Most of the thousands of warriors from 13 palaces had also sunk into the world of laws, just like Zen. They were trying to comprehend as much of these carvings as possible. Layla was bored and even started to stretch herself. Seeing the serious expressions on Zen's face, she curled her lips and finally, with nothing to do, also picked up the stone carving. The warriors only had 40 hours to comprehend the stone carvings and they were trying to make the most of it. Zen had been standing in front of the huge stone and was delayed for a couple of hours. Therefore, after Zen had meditated only for about 30 hours, a voice simultaneously sounded in everyone's ears. "Alright, folks, time is up. Please put down the stone carvings in your hands and enter the enchanted barrier tower. Quickly now." The voice belonged to the old man dressed in cotton clothes and standing near the tower. The warriors, who were standing at the side of the square, put down the stone carvings and quickly stood up. Everyone was naturally well prepared to participate in the passing the torch. But some of them were more confident than ever, while some had hesitant expressions on their faces. Some of them also uttered, "I wonder what the reward is this time." The old man in cotton clothes continued speaking indifferently, unfazed by the mutters. "This time, those who can reach 1,000 miles will be rewarded with a tribulation exterminating pill." Tribulation exterminating pill? Zen's eyes flashed. Luckily, Layla immediately explained, "The tribulation exterminating pill is a powerful medicine that can extinguish the punishment imposed on us by the heavens." Destroy the heavenly tribulation directly? Zen asked curiously, "But from my estimate, the warriors here probably don't need the tribulation exterminating pill, right?" To an ordinary warrior, the tribulation exterminating pill might be incomparably important. Some of them would really suffer a lot while undergoing the heavenly tribulation, and if they weren't careful, they could end up dead. In the past, when Zen had undergone a small heavenly tribulation, he had been almost killed by the black light. However, undergoing the tribulation even once was extremely beneficial for the warriors themselves. The warriors of 13 palaces were talented people from 10th grade sacred places. Going through the tribulation was actually a good thing for them. Layla, a warrior at the 9th level of the life and death realm, was looking forward to the 10th small heavenly tribulation. To these warriors, exterminating the tribulation was not a good thing, but would be a great loss, since they were in no danger but would lose its effects. Layla slightly smiled and replied, "Of course not. The tribulation exterminating pill isn't able to completely destroy the heavenly tribulation. If that were the case, then I wouldn't want it. The tribulation exterminating pill can only delay the arrival of the heavenly tribulation. If a warrior is already in danger or severely injured, it would be inconvenient for him to undergo the heavenly tribulation. If the heavenly tribulation arrives, then this tribulation exterminating pill can be used to delay the heavenly tribulation." Zen nodded his head, thinking what Layla was saying made sense. Back when he was in the Sea God continent, the 2 ogre sacred places had launched a surprise attack during the absence of Amber, who had gone out to undergo the tribulation. Although Amber had successfully passed through the tribulation and come back in time, both she and her race had been in an extremely dangerous situation while she was gone. It seemed that the tribulation exterminating pill could indeed be of some use at a critical moment. Reaching 1,000 miles will get you only one tribulation exterminating pill. This reward for passing the torch seems to be too small. Are there any other prizes? Please tell us. These warriors were participating in passing the torch just for its rewards. Naturally, they would pay attention to them and want bigger ones to be present. The old man continued, "Those who can travel 3,000 miles will be rewarded with a secondary first-rank divine weapon." Zen had been slightly interested in the tribulation exterminating pill. He felt a bit of a lack of interest when it came to the secondary first-rank divine weapon. As for the warriors from 13 palaces, they were also somewhat dissatisfied. "I heard that the warriors who traveled 3,000 miles in the last passing the torch were rewarded with first-rank divine weapons, but this year the reward is just a secondary first-rank divine weapon. So cheap." Indeed, the rewards seem to have decreased in grade this time. What happened, I wonder? The old man dressed in cotton clothes didn't care about everyone's dissatisfaction and continued with his announcement, "As for the reward of traveling 10,000 miles, I will announce it when someone of you is able to make it." Obviously, the old man wanted to keep everyone guessing and increase suspense. The crowd was naturally unhappy. It was extremely difficult to advance through the law storm. Very few warriors would be able to move forward even for 1,000 miles. As for reaching the 3,000 miles mark, most likely, only about a dozen warriors would be able to do so. 10,000 miles was a dream that was unimaginable. The warriors of 13 palaces wondered whether there was even a single warrior who could travel 10,000 miles. To be honest, there was no point in announcing the rewards of this case. No one would make it. Although everyone was dissatisfied, no one chose to give up. They were clear that the benefits attained by passing the torch were not limited to just this. If they were able to achieve a good result, then they would be highly valued in the palaces. And they could also get a lot of resources, several times more than they had now. Chapter 1054. At the end of the line. Under the instruction of the old man in the cotton clothes, the crowd of warriors rapidly moved towards the enchanted barrier tower. Although it was called the enchanted barrier tower, it didn't look like a tower. It was in fact a massive space that had Lost Storm tightly locked within it. As the Lost Storm continued to rage, it was as if this space was limitless, but, in reality, there was a boundary. In the deepest part of the enchanted barrier tower, there was a mighty power lingering there, left by the fight among several supreme lords. Anyone who got sucked into the power would suffer the inevitable consequence, and their bodies would be smashed to smithereens. Of course, that would only happen when one reached 100,000 miles into the tower's depths. It was impossible for the younger generation of the 13 palaces to reach such a depth. Hence, they were quite safe still. Thousands of martial artists entered the enchanted barrier tower. As soon as they entered the enchanted barrier tower, everyone felt a strong law power rushing towards them. This law power contains many different laws. Zen raised his head cautiously and looked ahead. The laws in front of him formed a violent storm that covered nearly every corner of the enchanted barrier tower. Even though they had just entered the tower, everyone already felt a formidable pressure building around them. Many of the martial artists immediately revolved their body-protecting life vitality to protect themselves. Only a few of the gathered talents did not use body-protecting life vitality, such as Javier, Layla of the Mist Palace, and the other top talents of the other 12 palaces. As for Zen, he did not use the body-protecting life vitality to protect his body either, not because he did not want to, but the problem was that he did not have life vitality anymore. Although the characteristics of the chaotic energy and life vitality were very similar, and to a certain extent, the chaotic energy could be regarded as an enhanced version of life vitality, the chaotic energy was not distributed evenly like the life vitality when it surged out. Or perhaps Zen just hadn't grasped the method to make it emerge more evenly yet. However, this was not the appropriate place to experiment now. The martial artists of the 13 palaces had been gathered here from many supreme worlds. They would become core members if they chose to stay in any 10th grade sacred places. And right now, each of them wanted to outperform the others. Competition was stiff. Seeing that Javier, Layla, and some others had easily adapted themselves to the Lost Storm without activating their body-protecting life vitality, the other warriors were soon convinced that they were really extraordinary talents. However, when they saw that Zen, who was a warrior only at the 5th level of the life and death realm, hadn't used his body-protecting life vitality either, they had disdainful looks in their eyes. Just keep bluffing. If he can't hold on for more than 100 miles, that would be truly shameful. Haha, there are always people who make a fool out of themselves. This year, the test in the enchanted barrier tower was not a competition of speed. They needed to use their skills and strength to walk through the Lost Storm as far as they could. After they entered, some moved fast, some were slow, but they all started to explore deeper into the tower. In the beginning, the crowd was gathered close together, but gradually, the thousands of martial artists formed a long line, and the whole group soon became scattered. The Lost Storm continuously roared, and occasionally, a few fire laws would coalesce together to form a flame the size of a fist. One of these flames suddenly struck Zen's body, sending a searing pain throughout his body. Or sometimes, a few wind laws collided with each other, forming a few tiny wind blades that swept over the warriors. Zen's speed wasn't fast, but he looked extremely calm and collected as he quietly sized up this world filled with all sorts of laws. These law powers didn't fuse together. They only intertwined with each other after being shattered. At this moment, Zen noticed that a few of the time laws had gathered together and formed into a small ball, shooting towards him. His eyes followed the disturbance through the air as it raced towards him. Zen extended his hand and gently poked the small ball. The moment his finger entered the ball, his speed suddenly decreased markedly. However, after calmly circulating the time law, Zen managed to offset the effect of the time laws in the ball. Then the ball shattered like soap bubbles. When the laws are intertwined together, there is a very familiar feeling, Zen thought. After he entered the enchanted barrier tower, Zen had become a bit absent-minded. It was this odd feeling of familiarity that distracted him. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out where this feeling of familiarity was coming from. Layla had long since rushed to the front of the group, while Zen lagged behind, and was still at the back. There were even some weaker warriors behind him who were increasing their speed and surpassing Zen quickly. As they passed Zen, all of these martial artists had looks of surprise on their faces. They had thought that Zen was strong as he had got the attention of Yolanda and Layla, but they were astounded that he wasn't in the lead with the other warriors. This fellow doesn't use life vitality to protect himself. It will be extremely difficult for him to travel through this lost storm like that. What is he trying to do? They all thought in their hearts. Of course Zen didn't care about the strange gazes which the others directed at him. He maintained his speed and moved forward at a steady pace. This group of martial artists could fly very fast given their current advanced cultivation. If it weren't for the lost storm, it probably would only have taken them a quarter of an hour to reach the goal of traveling 1,000 miles into the enchanted barrier tower. However, the further they went, the more terrifying the lost storm became, and as a result, this greatly slowed down their speed. Outside of the enchanted barrier tower, on the rooftop of an ancient building, the many leaders and vice-leaders of the palaces sat around a large round table. As for the old man in the cotton clothes, he was sitting in the center. They were all closely watching what was happening in the enchanted barrier tower. There are a few kids who are starting to speed up. Hee, the old man in the cotton clothes said with a faint smile. One of the leaders laughed lightly and said, "The one rushing in front seems to be Kunal Fang, a warrior from our Ice Might Palace. Hee, it seems like Kunal Fang will be the first to reach the 1,000 miles. It's not a competition of speed. He who laughs last, laughs best. Only the one who sticks it out to the end, and reaches the furthest, is the best." Another leader retorted, though a shadow of doubt flickered in his face. His own warriors were not near the front, and he worried that they would not succeed at this challenge. The old man in the cotton clothes faintly smiled and said, "In this passing the torch, I think that girl will be the best." After saying that, he pointed in the distance, and the gazes of the many leaders of the palaces landed on Layla. A warrior from the Mist Palace. That girl is called Layla, if memory serves me right. Indeed, she has potential. However, it is still too early to come to this conclusion. Layla was indeed outstanding, but there were also some super talents in the other 12 palaces. Their strengths were not to be underestimated, and they weren't about to be defeated that easily. The old man in the cotton clothes shook his head resolutely and said, "You all know, I have always been accurate with my judgment of people. This Layla is the most outstanding. Her excellence far surpasses that of talents in a general sense." The faces of the other leaders darkened when they heard this. After all, the 13 palaces had always been on par with each other. In the competitions of the passing the torch, their rankings came with ups and downs, but the disparity was not too great. This maintained a kind of status quo and kept the challenge more or less even. This Layla is Chiron's disciple. It is said that she has the fate to lead the world of chaos. It is not strange that she is so outstanding. Actually, strictly speaking, she is not a warrior of the Mist Palace. It must be Chiron who suddenly decided to let her participate in the passing the torch. A leader jested lightly. So that explains it. It is indeed difficult for an ordinary talent to contend against her, since she is a warrior who has the fate of leading the world of chaos, and therefore, a great destiny. When the other leaders of the palaces heard these words, they inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. At least, they could more easily accept what the old man said after they had discovered her background. Yolanda also nodded slightly and said, "Yes, Layla is not a warrior of our Mist Palace." She didn't place her hopes on Layla, so she told them frankly. Right at this moment, the old man in the cotton clothes pointed at someone and laughed. "This kid is actually the last one." Everyone's eyes swept across the tower and discovered that Zen was now at the end of the line. Thousands of martial artists had formed a long line as they moved forwards through the lost storm in the tower. Only Zen was left behind, and he was at the ending of the line. This naturally attracted a lot of attention and speculation. The leaders of the palaces also smiled condescendingly. Zen was the last one that had arrived. Currently, he also stood last in the test of the enchanted barrier tower. It was indeed strange. Several of the leaders even glanced at Yolanda, their gazes faintly mocking, and she could almost see them shaking their heads imperceptibly. This boy has actually not used the body-protecting life vitality. Interesting. I don't know why, and he's moving so slowly. Yolanda still looked very calm. She believed in Zen's strength, but she was becoming a bit curious. What was Zen thinking? Zen still kept everything under his control, maintaining a steady speed as he advanced. The fragments of laws in the air were in complete disarray, making it impossible for him to comprehend them. Of course, he wouldn't have comprehended the original laws here. This place defied all notions of what should be and what shouldn't be. And at this time, the dozens of martial artists that were walking at the front of the line had already traveled 800 miles. They began to rush forward to cross the 1,000 miles line. Everyone wanted to be the first. Although the first one to reach the 1,000 miles would not receive any extra rewards according to the rules, the old man in the cotton clothes would announce the names of the top 10 warriors who had passed the 1,000 miles mark. It would also bring honor to the palaces that they belonged to. Warriors were all lured by esteem and prestige. Of course, Layla strived hard, though not for the honor of the Mist Palace. She was a very proud warrior. How could she be willing to fall behind? She would not let herself fail and prepared for the final sprint. At an extremely fast speed, she charged forward through the law storm. Right now, she was still ranked third, but her only goal was to become the first. Chapter 1055, Winner of the First 1,000 Miles. The long line that the 4,000 people had formed could be divided into 3 echelons. The first echelon had only about 20 martial artists, and they had already advanced 800 miles in the law storm. Although this region's law storm was much stronger, these super talents didn't feel any pressure. They were competing against each other to be the fastest. The moment they had entered the enchanted barrier tower, they had rushed off at full speed towards the 1,000-mile mark. The fastest warrior at the moment was one from the Shadow Palace whose surname was Li. He was completely surrounded by a black domain that immediately swallowed any law fragments that approached him. He was using this method to advance rapidly, and the law fragments in the law storm were failing to hinder him. Javier was the second fastest. He was an excellent warrior among those who had ascended to the upper world. There weren't any tricks involved in his advancing within law storm, he relied completely on his own strength. He kept an eye on the law storm as he advanced. 900 miles done, Layla mumbled to herself. Another 100 miles to go. She smiled at this and ground to a halt. The martial artists in the first group weren't too far apart from each other, just a mile or so apart. Everyone was pushing their individual speeds to the limit. So when Layla stopped suddenly, the other warriors rushed past her, leaving her behind. In the blink of an eye, she had dropped from the third place to the end of the first echelon. The martial practitioners who had surpassed her were puzzled. Nobody knew why she had stopped so suddenly. But Layla only paused for a minute. With a light flick of her wrist, green rays of light spread out from behind her back, forming 2 wings that radiated the green light. She flapped her wings gently and nimbly flew forward. Whoosh! Her speed left a trailing smear behind her. By then, the martial artist surnamed Li had become excited. He had already traveled 950 miles. He only needed 50 more miles to reach the destination. He did not care about the reward, a mere tribulation exterminating pill. Everyone could obtain that, but the Shadow Palace had secretly promised him that if he came to be the fastest to finish traveling 1,000 miles, he would be rewarded with a first-rank divine weapon. He wanted to help Shadow Palace get this glory. And he was just about to succeed. But it felt like success had come too easily to him. But just as he advanced, a whistling sound caught his attention. A shadow flew past him, causing his vision to blur for a moment. What was that? He hadn't seen Layla clearly. Under the ravaging of the law storm, everyone's vision had been limited to a very small range. And he thought that the movement was caused by the storm. A few seconds later, the old man in cotton clothes spoke. The first warrior to travel 1,000 miles is Layla I of Mist Palace. Li was stunned at this, his face filled with disbelief. What? Outside the enchanted barrier tower, the old man and many other palace heads stared at the pair of wings on Layla's back, amazed. Those are the green wind wings. This girl is still at the life and death realm, but she is already able to control this pair of wings. To use green wind wings, doesn't one have to cultivate the embryo of the green wind spirit in the elixir field? She is only at the life and death realm. How was she able to do that without opening her soul sea? Green wind wings were not something that a human could possess. It came from the abilities of a special creature in the storm, the green wind spirit. Those with these wings could soar thousands of miles in an instant. The green wind spirit was not an ordinary creature. It was impossible for a martial artist to inherit or obtain their bloodline. But in order to become stronger and faster, every martial artist would rack their brains to come up with a method to obtain those wings. In the end, someone had thought of a way. They got the embryo of the green wind spirit, put it into their elixir field, nurtured it with their life vitality, hatched it, and gradually controlled the wings. This method was extremely dangerous and costly. Moreover, if there was even the slightest mistake, the warrior's elixir field would be damaged, and he would become a cripple. In the entire universe, there were very few warriors who could catch the embryo of the green wind spirit, and even fewer who could successfully nurture it. Those who did succeed were at the spirit supreme realm or higher. At the moment, they couldn't understand how Layla, who was at the 9th level of the life and death realm, had obtained these wings. Layla stopped and looked back after she had covered the 1,000 miles. She had left everyone else far behind, and this brought a smug look to her face. Too easy. This is not challenging at all. I wonder what place Zen is in now. That fellow can't fight for the first place in the first 1,000 miles anymore. Even though she had obtained first place in the first 1,000 miles, Layla didn't let her guard down. Her premonitions were always accurate, and according to her, the actual competition between her and Zen was yet to come. 400 miles away, Zen continued to fly at a moderate pace. He smiled as he heard the old man's voice. The first squad of martial artists had already crossed 1,000 miles. The martial artists in the second squad had covered between 700 and 800 miles. The slowest of the martial artists in the third squad had traveled 500 miles, while the fastest had covered 600 miles. Zen, however, was even not close to the third squad. I can't figure it out, so I'll forget about it for now, he thought. He shook his head to dispel all thoughts and quickened his pace. The intensity of the lost storm within the first 1,000 miles didn't fluctuate a lot. 10 minutes later, Zen finally crossed 1,000 miles. By then, all the warriors in the 3 squads had passed this stage. He was still the slowest. He felt the lost storm become stronger beyond the first 1,000 miles. This lost storm should be a circle, and we should be closer to the center. This reminded Zen of the chaotic ocean of stars. The storms of the chaotic ocean of stars were formed by the wind law only, not like the disordered law powers around him. But although the lost storm was a little stronger, it still didn't put much pressure on Zen. Outside the enchanted barrier tower, the old man in cotton clothes said, 3,000 miles is a hurdle. Many warriors would be eliminated before they reach the destination. One of the palace heads nodded and replied, some of the law power will condense after 1,000 miles. It becomes stronger. The key question is, how will these warriors deal with it? Where is the slowest little guy? Is he still at the end? A palace head laughed. That's right, that little fellow is quite strange. He's already beyond 1,000 miles, but he still hasn't used his life vitality. Could it be that he doesn't intend to use it at all? Another palace head said, amused. These palace leaders had discovered that Zen was special. This wasn't, in any way, a form of praise. They just thought he was weird. They were all paying attention to the martial artists of their own palaces. Layla had won the first prize in the first 1,000 miles. Now it was time to compete in endurance, to see who could travel the farthest in the lost storm. Many martial artists were having a difficult time walking forward in the endless lost storm. The martial artists of the first group had kept their pace, but those of the second group had slowed down by a great deal. From time to time, a highly powerful fire spirit would emerge from the storm and fly towards the warriors. Sometimes, a black wind blade would appear all of a sudden. These dangers were fatal, so everyone had to be careful. Chapter 1056, Being Eliminated. As everyone else receded their pace, Zen maintained a steady speed as he eventually caught up with the other warriors. Without further delay, he surpassed a warrior. Soon, he passed by the second, the third, the fourth. The warriors at the tail were likely to be defeated because their strength and speed seemed highly inadequate and they wouldn't be able to catch up in time. Some of them, facing the threat of a fierce lost storm, even considered of giving up altogether. After all, every warrior had a distinct goal, one that might be significantly different from another. Some warriors were aware that their own strength was limited, so they would be satisfied with just a tribulation exterminating pill. However, there were also some warriors who persevered despite all odds, even though their strength was barely enough. They realized that they wouldn't be able to cover 3,000 miles, but they chose to challenge themselves to the last minute rather than surrender once and for all. The attitude of a warrior was of prime importance in his life. An unusual space unexpectedly appeared inside the lost storm. A warrior had accidentally entered and was in fact bound by that space. He surely wished to escape, but perhaps it was too late. At that precise moment, a sharp black wind blade suddenly appeared in front of him, swiftly chopping off his arm. Another warrior inadvertently triggered the fluctuation of some law and was surrounded by many red flames. Simultaneously, sharp golden lights enveloped him and several holes appeared in his body. After 1,000 miles, situations like these were not novel. More and more warriors got injured and they could only give up midway. The speed of the warriors in the third and second tiers receded drastically. Every warrior appeared to be very cautious on his way forward. However, the speed of the warriors in the first tier still couldn't be underestimated. They were considered to be the elites of the 13 palaces. They were also the selected elites from among the elites of the 3,000 supreme worlds. Moreover, most of them were warriors who had activated the 9-petal lotus flower. Whether it was their hard work and determination or their gifted talent and ultimate perseverance, they simply couldn't be matched by ordinary warriors. Therefore, the warriors in the first tier had gotten miles away from those of the second tier. When the warriors in the second tier barely touched 700 miles, Layla, who was the confident leader in the first tier, had victoriously covered 2,000 miles. The warriors in third tier had just reached 500 miles. They indeed had a sad existence. Zen found himself at the middle of the third tier. Whoosh, 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 ice spears suddenly appeared within the law storm, enveloping an area not too far away from where Zen was standing. There was a warrior just ahead of Zen. His face seemed to showcase a faint trace of fear. Just as he was about to flee, he discovered that his speed had turned out to become excruciatingly slow. He was entirely enveloped by the cage created by the time law. Although his speed hadn't exactly fallen, the after effect was that his speed had receded to 1% of his original speed due to the time law. It was impossible for him to dodge the ice spears that frequently kept attacking him from all directions. If one of the ice spears would be able to strike him, the result would be devastating. Even if he did manage to evade death, he would be seriously injured. When he noticed this scene unfolding before him, Zen's figure suddenly flashed and moved hundreds of feet forward, arriving right beside that warrior. The time law. With that thought, Zen also circulated the time law. The time law and space law were rather special as warriors could use the same law to cancel out any of these two laws. After breaking the cage created by the time law, Zen quickly pulled the warrior away and the sharp ice spears landed on the ground where the warrior had been standing. The warrior had been scared out of his wits by whatever had just occurred. When he was saved by Zen, a look of gratitude naturally appeared on his face. "Thank you for saving my life." Zen nodded his head, but did not care to pause at all. He maintained his speed as he continued to strive his way ahead. The number of helpless warriors eliminated by the law storm continued to increase exorbitantly. Especially the warriors in the third tier were more vulnerable, such as the one who Zen just rescued. If it wasn't for Zen, he would have had to give up and surrender immediately. The third tier comprised of around 3,000 warriors. After they had covered 1,000 miles, more than 1,000 warriors had already faced inevitable situations and gotten themselves eliminated. As for the second tier, it was composed of over 1,000 brave warriors, and now they had to let go about 300 of them. Whereas not a single warrior from the first tier had been eliminated so far. Their performance during this year's competition has been exemplary. The elimination rate is comparatively low. Moreover, there were only 7 or 8 warriors in the first tier before. This time, there are more than 20 people contesting, significantly increasing the caliber pool of the competition. That is more than 3 times the last year's number. The old man in cotton clothes let out a satisfied smile. Now that the world of chaos has started, these young talents are naturally expected to appear. It's perfectly normal that there are more than 20 warriors in the first tier. Besides the 13 palaces, other forces of the alliance, the human race and other races have also welcomed many talented warriors, another palace leader replied. The old man nodded. If that's the case, then they might topple the previous record in passing the torch. Within the enchanted barrier tower, the best record of the previous generations was 18,000 miles. A palace master shook his head and smiled. "I don't think anyone can break Supreme Lord Illusion's 18,000-mile record. But there definitely is a hope of breaking the second record this time." Supreme Lord Illusion was the warrior who had used 4 hours to adapt to the vitality between heaven and earth in the upper world. In the past, he had also participated in passing the torch. When he had entered the enchanted barrier tower, he had created a shocking record of the magnitude that hadn't been witnessed before or after, 18,000 miles. At that time, even Supreme Lord Illusion was at the 9th grade of the life and death realm. Why did this record leave the other warriors dumbfounded? Because before that, the best result was only a mere 12,000 miles. And with the appearance of Supreme Lord Illusion, he raised the bar to a whopping 18,000 miles. An increase of 6,000 miles was simply too terrifying and overwhelming. After that incident, no one else had gotten close to breaking the legendary record. During the later years, there were a few talented warriors who shattered 12,000-mile record and achieved a distance of 14,000 miles. This result was the second rank in the Enchanted Barrier Tower. Right, I think so too. Perhaps Layla can cover 14,000 miles, another palace leader stated bluntly. Yolanda didn't pay much attention to the discussion that the other palace leaders were indulged in. Her gaze was still solely focused on Zen. Although he remained in the third tier, he was slowly moving ahead to occupy the front row of third tier. It seemed as if he would enter the second tier soon enough. Many palace leaders were only concerned about the warriors in the first tier. Naturally, they didn't notice that the guy who had ranked last maintained a steady pace as he moved forward, surpassing many others. After a while, the first tier of warriors had finally broken through the 3,000-mile mark. The old man dressed in cotton clothes reported the names of the top 10 once again. Layla managed to retain her first position and was the center of attention. Besides, her background was rather special as well. Although she was participating in passing the torch representing the Mist Palace, the palace leaders didn't treat her as a warrior of the Mist Palace. Therefore, many of the palace leaders were rather generous in their praise for Layla. This girl must be the center of attention in the world of chaos. That's what I think too. Chiron Xiao has the insight to recognize sheer talent at a single glimpse. They talked about Layla extensively as the warriors kept struggling to move forward. Layla appeared to be unusually calm, she neither seemed tensed nor excited. After passing 3,000 miles, she used her time for a quick rest. Speed was no longer the key factor from the 3,000th mile to the 10,000th mile, so she was in no hurry. She bit her lips and shot a quick glance behind her. Why is Zen still not here? She wondered. The second one was not the warrior whose surname was Li from the Shadow Palace, but Javier. Javier was one of Yolanda's admirers. He was panting. Relying on his greater willpower, he surpassed the warrior with the surname Li and became the second one to cover 3,000 miles right behind Layla. He looked at the boundless lost storm and cried out in his mind, "Yolanda, can't you see? I will definitely grow up to be good enough for you." The third place. The fourth place. All of the warriors in the first tier slowed down after reaching the 3,000-mile mark. There was still a long way to go. The 10,000th mile was a huge hurdle, and not many had successfully covered it. After a surprising turn of events, Zen finally left the third tier and entered the second tier. When he entered the second tier had passed 3,000 miles. The second tier originally was composed of over 1,000 people. Now, there were only about 300 people as 70% of them had been eliminated. The competition had gotten fierce and the prize seemed near, yet so far. Chapter 1057, 10th Tribulation Introducing Pill. In the Enchanted Barrier Tower, the 3,000th mile was a huge hurdle. In the first tier, not a single warrior was eliminated. But in the second tier, 70% of the warriors were eliminated. As for the third tier of warriors, they were even more desperate. 90% of them had been eliminated, and only 300 out of the 3,000 warriors had passed this stage. However, the warriors who had covered 3,000 miles were already very proud of themselves. The Alliance would invest more resources to train them. As for the reward of a secondary first-rank divine weapon, it was simply insignificant in their eyes. After 3,000 miles, the warriors in all the tiers had slowed down greatly. Zen, however, maintained his own speed. If people had been paying full attention to him, they would have known that his speed hadn't changed at all since the beginning. Moreover, he still hadn't used life vitality to protect his body. He only relied on his own strength and body as he faced the vicious lost storm. Only Yolanda had been watching Zen from beginning to end. It didn't take long for someone else to take notice too. As the old man in cotton clothes was looking at the warriors in the first tier, he looked back and discovered something wrong with the second tier. The old man's eyes lit up. This young man isn't using his life vitality to protect himself. When he looked over, his expression froze. Isn't that the guy who was late? Wasn't he at the tail? When did he catch up with the second tier? And he even went over 3,000 miles. 3,000 miles wasn't much of an accomplishment to the old man. Zen didn't exactly perform the best before, so the old man had completely forgotten about him. If it wasn't for the fact that Zen wasn't using his life vitality, the old man probably wouldn't have noticed him. However, Zen, who had been lugging around in last place, was now suddenly catching up. It was as if he had been teleported. Naturally, the old man was surprised. Is this the same guy who was in the last place and refused to use life vitality to protect himself? Asked another palace leader. That's him. How interesting. I didn't expect him to catch up to the front of the second tier. It's a bit strange. He has covered 3,000 miles, but still hasn't used his life vitality to protect himself. He's very confident in his own strength. There are a lot of interesting people in the Mist Palace right now. Layla aside, even the one who's in the second place is from the Mist Palace. The rest of the palace leaders turned their attention towards Zen. I would like to see if this guy has any plans on using his life vitality to protect himself. The truth was that using life vitality was only a method for warriors to protect themselves. This method might be considered useful within 3,000 miles, but it wasn't that useful after 3,000 miles. Warriors cultivating some special cultivation methods were an exception, such as those cultivating Earth Law. Look at his speed, he's a lot faster than the other warriors. He's going to catch up to the first tier soon enough. Wow, he's truly something. Upon the old man mentioning Zen, the rest of the palace leaders started talking about him. While everyone was surprised by his performance, they were still a bit skeptical. As the warriors moved forward, besides strength, they also had to rely on their own comprehension and ability to deal with enemies. Warriors that could safely cross 3,000 miles all had their own secret weapons. But even so, the speed at which they were being eliminated was still increasing. No one from the first tier had been eliminated when they reached the 4,000th mile, while half of the second tier had been eliminated, and 2/3 of the third tier had been eliminated. 5,000 miles, 6,000 miles, 7.000 miles. Zen had already surpassed the second tier and caught up to the last person in the first tier. At this time, the Law Storm had risen to yet another level. Ice spears, wind blades, earth spikes, time cages, and other such weapons occasionally appeared before, but now, they were everywhere. Warriors gave their everything to fight these obstacles, and Zen was no exception. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Suddenly, countless spikes appeared on the ground. Although these spikes were formed from rock, the surface was gold in color. The sharpness of these spikes was comparable to a sacred weapon. Zen's figure was like a shuttlefish as he continuously swam between the spikes. The moment he dodged the spikes, countless ice thorns burst out from them and completely sealed off his entire body. After a while, the ground was suddenly shaking and all the ice thorns were shattered by some huge force. Zen's lean figure appeared again and continued moving forward at his pace. This guy really has some skills. His strength is amazing and his body seems strong too. With his strength, he can enter the first tier. Now that Zen had caught up to the first tier, it naturally attracted the attention of some of the palace leaders. As for Yolanda, she still looked stoic. This still wasn't Zen's full strength yet. She would reserve her energy for that. At the 8,000th mile, a warrior from the first tier was finally eliminated. At this time, there were less than 10 warriors left in the second tier. As for the third tier, they were completely eliminated. No one reached the 8,000 mile mark. Right now, the warriors that had been eliminated had returned to the square. After being eliminated, they could only become spectators. Layla was definitely leading in first place. Most of the remaining 30+ warriors had just passed 8,000 miles, but Layla had already reached the 9,500th mile. She would cross 10,000 miles in no time. When she reached the 9,800th mile, she turned her head to look at the boundless Law Storm and murmured, "Zen, you can't possibly be eliminated now, right? If you're eliminated, you won't be qualified to be my opponent anymore." After speaking, she once again turned her head. The pair of green wings on her back lightly flapped as she rapidly shuttled forward amidst the Law Storm. The first warrior who has passed 10,000 miles is Layla I from the Mist Palace. The old man's voice came as she passed 10,000 miles. The warriors on the plaza were also discussing among themselves. 10,000 miles. She has already passed 10,000 miles. Didn't he say that once someone crossed 10,000 miles, he would announce the reward for it? Why isn't he announcing it yet? She's too strong. How can a woman defeat so many men? The old man continued to announce, warriors that have reached the 10,000th mile will be able to obtain a 10th tribulation introducing pill. As the old man finished speaking, the warriors that were standing on the square began to discuss among themselves. The 10th tribulation introducing pill. What? That's amazing. Oh my goodness, if I had known, I would have fought with all my might. The 10th tribulation introducing pill was able to introduce the heavenly tribulation. It had the similar function of the tribulation flower that Zen had swallowed on the Divine Kingdom continent. The tribulation flower could increase the number of heavenly tribulations to 9. There were many warriors in the upper world that didn't need to swallow a tribulation flower. With their talent, they would eventually anger the heavens. Naturally, they would have to face countless calamities. Talents in the upper world all had to face 9 heavenly tribulations. If a warrior entered the Soul Sea realm with the cultivation of the 8th grade of the Life and Death realm, then he or she would not be qualified to be called a talent. The 10th Tribulation Introducing Pill was very rare. Even though the 10th Tribulation Introducing Pill and the Tribulation Exterminating Pill were both pills related to heavenly tribulation, the two couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. The Tribulation Exterminating Pill was only a 7th grade pill, while the 10th Tribulation Introducing Pill was a 9th grade pill. The most important thing was that this pill could help a warrior trigger the 10th heavenly tribulation, which was also called the Perfection Tribulation. This was because after the 10th heavenly tribulation, a warrior's foundation would then go into a perfect state which, of course, was important to a warrior. Layla pursed her lips and continued moving forward. After she had passed 10,000 miles, Javier was right after her. However, there were 2 deep holes with blood in his legs and his clothes were torn apart. He looked rather miserable. Chapter 1058, Gap. Except for Layla, the rest of the warriors from the first tier were injured in varying degrees. All the warriors were equipped with many healing panaceas, but the problem was that the Lost Storm was everywhere in the enchanted barrier tower. There was no place for them to hide and heal their wounds. Therefore, at this moment, everyone had to endure the pain and keep moving forward. It was a true test of their endurance. After Javier covered the distance of 10,000 miles, the other warriors on the first tier also sprinted to cover the same distance. Only 2 or 3 warriors had managed to travel 10,000 miles during the passing the torch in the past. Sometimes, only 1 warrior managed to do this. But this time, the number had increased significantly. By the time Zen reached the 10,000-mile mark, he was already ranked 13th. Other than occasionally dodging a powerful law power in the storm, he had been able to move forward at a constant speed. But he wasn't faster than some of the other warriors who had used special methods to increase their speed. They used these methods as a boost in the last stretch of the test and sprinted as fast as they could. But Zen was much calmer than the other warriors and he wasn't injured. As of now, Layla and Zen were probably the only ones who were completely unharmed in the enchanted barrier tower. There is something very strange here. This guy called Zen seems to have maintained the same speed from start to end. Well, his speed is neither fast nor slow, he maintains a steady pace. In a Lost Storm of this level, it's hard to believe that he is completely unharmed. Hearing this, Yolanda's eyes flashed faintly. It was only now that these warriors were noticing Zen's amazing performance. He had now become the center of attention. Although he still hadn't made it into the top 10, his calm demeanor made him appear enigmatic. Zen had maintained his ranking in the top 13 for 5 minutes, while 2 super talents in front of him had been injured in succession and were eliminated from the enchanted barrier tower. With their elimination, Zen moved up to the 11th position. The warrior ranked 10th wasn't too far from Zen. It seemed as if he had also been ravaged by the Lost Storm, and was finding it extremely difficult to even take a single step further. It was easy for Zen to surpass this injured warrior and enter the top 10 now. Zen was closing in on his opponent, but just as he was about to surpass him, the warrior turned around and glared at him. Then he bit his tongue and burnt his blood essence, causing the aura from the savage land to erupt from his body. Whoosh! The warrior's speed suddenly increased 3 times, and he zoomed ahead, leaving Zen far behind. Clearly, he didn't want Zen to beat him. Looking at the warrior who was moving further and further away, Zen shook his head and smiled. Did he do that just to retain his place in the top 10? He thought curiously. This warrior might have inherited some sort of ancient bloodline. Blood essence was very precious. But he had burnt his own blood essence just to stay in the top 10. This was a bit of a waste. Moreover, at this stage, speed was no longer important. In fact, after they traveled 10,000 miles, it was more a competition of endurance. The warrior fled rapidly into the endless Lost Storm. His figure quickly became blurry and he gradually disappeared from Zen's line of sight. Zen maintained his pace, continuing to fly at a moderate speed. Another 5 minutes passed. As he advanced steadily, a gigantic black hole appeared not far away. It completely engulfed the warrior who ranked 10th. The law power at this stage was already terrifying. In addition to that, some very rare laws were also present in the Lost Storm. Although these laws were derived from the original law, they had formed another law system. This huge black hole was the legendary Dark Law. It was said that once one cultivated this dark law to its full limit, it would be able to devour everything, including the entire universe. Although the black hole in front of Zen couldn't achieve this, it was difficult for the warrior, who was devoured into it, to get out and fight it on his own. As he passed the black hole, Zen also felt its strong magnetic pull. At the same time, he also saw that the warrior within the black hole was trying to call out to him. But Zen could not hear any sound. The black hole could absorb everything, including sound and light. The warrior's cries for help could not escape the black hole either. Zen tried to read the warrior's lips and understood that the warrior wanted him to help. He shook his head indifferently. It wasn't that he planned to just stand by and watch the warrior get eliminated. In fact, it might not be a big deal for Zen to help the warrior escape the black hole. But Zen himself wasn't familiar with the Dark Law. It would be too bad if he, too, were to get trapped in it. He also believed that the palace leaders would help to extract the warrior from the black hole. At this point though, the chances of the warrior getting eliminated were high, or perhaps it could be said that he had already been eliminated. Now that he had surpassed and replaced his competing warrior, Zen was finally in the 10th place. However, just as Zen entered the top 10, a figure flew overhead at a high speed. He didn't see it clearly in this boundless law storm. He could only make out that the faint shadow might belong to a big bird. When the big bird approached, Zen realized that it was Layla. But she had a pair of wings on her back. When Layla came closer he asked with a strange expression, "Why are you flying back?" She looked at him blandly and replied, "I thought you have already been eliminated." "I won't be eliminated so easily," Zen said, shaking his head confidently. "You are just too slow." She mocked him again. "We are not competing for speed." Zen was not going to increase his speed in order to chase after someone, nor was he going to slow down for anybody. "It is great that you are not eliminated. I'll wait for you in the front." Layla spread her wings and flew away. However, suddenly a snowstorm appeared. Gigantic fireballs formed by the fire laws and ice spears, which were over 100 feet long, started falling on them. Layla whizzed off, and she passed through the snowstorm in a flash. Occasionally, there would be some fireballs blocking her way, but she wrapped her wings around her body and zoomed directly through them. She came back just to say something to Zen. Layla is really very self-confident. She can travel 12,000 miles with such ease. This woman might have the qualifications to challenge the record set by Supreme Lord Illusion. Not many warriors remained in the enchanted barrier tower, and the few who were there garnered attention by the others. Layla, who was previously ranked first, naturally received the most attention. She only wanted to talk to Zen when she had returned resolutely, which stunned the palace masters. Other warriors found it difficult to take a single step forward, but Layla seemed to advance in such a fierce law storm pretty easily. Everyone marveled at her remarkable ability. Meanwhile, Zen continued improving his ranking. 9th place, 8th place, 7th place. With his steady progress, he quickly entered the top 5 and then the top 4. By the time they reached the 13,000th mile, he was already in the top 3. This was because 7 of the top 10 warriors had already been eliminated. The strangest thing was that the top 3 warriors were from the Mist Palace. Layla was still in first place, Javier was second and Zen was third. The palace leaders and vice leaders from the other 12 palaces looked very embarrassed at this point. In the past, their warriors had excelled in this competition. However, this year, it seemed that every palace had some remarkable talents, and all of them had attained the 10,000-mile mark. All the warriors, who were still moving forward after traveling 10,000 miles, belonged to the Mist Palace. It was obvious that the gap between the warriors of the Mist Palace and those from other palaces was very large. Chapter 1059, 16,000 miles. The leader of the Shadow Palace sighed. It seems that the warriors of the Mist Palace are performing very well this year. The other palace leaders were also speechless. They didn't know where and how the Mist Palace had found such remarkable talents. It seemed that these 3 warriors could easily break the record, a distance of 14,000 miles. Yolanda was still calm. Yolanda thought that Zen had much greater potential than this. He could achieve far greater things. At this moment, the old man in cotton clothes spoke. "Zen and Javier are warriors who ascended from the lower world, right?" Yolanda nodded. "Yes." The old man dressed in cotton clothes chuckled and said, "It looks like we got another miracle from the warriors of the lower world." This so-called miracle of the warriors, who had ascended to the upper world, was just a concept that circulated in the upper world. Over the years, there had been many warriors who had ascended from the lower world, but most of them were just ordinary warriors with ordinary abilities. This was also pretty normal. Generally, the cultivation methods, inheritances, and resources of a supreme world were much superior to those of the lower world. So all those who had ascended from the lower world were always amazed at what they saw in the upper world. However, some of them had managed to surprise everyone with their skills and strength after they ascended. For instance, Supreme Lord Illusion's great talent surprised all of the members of the whole alliance before. After becoming a Supreme Lord, he became one of the most outstanding Supreme Lords ever. A miracle of the warriors from the lower world. Can it really be called a miracle? A palace leader shook his head. Are you saying that they might be able to break the record of Supreme Lord illusion? Another palace leader asked. The old record of 18,000 miles was difficult enough to beat, and not even the most talented warriors of 13 palaces could even dream to break it. In the previous passing the torch, no warrior then had the ability to break this record. The old man dressed in cotton clothes only chuckled and didn't say anything more. In the enchanted barrier tower, Layla didn't stay any longer. She was like a jubilant skylark, just freely flying through the law storm. Now that she was sure that Zen was following her, she didn't need to wait any longer. She wanted to leave him as far behind as possible. Layla's flying speed had now increased by double. No matter how crazy the law storm was, it was unable to hinder her agile figure. Javier, meanwhile, was exhausted. Javier had already cultivated in seclusion before he joined the passing the torch. Zen was brought into the Mist Palace by Yolanda not long after he ascended to the upper world. However, Javier had experienced a lot of hardships after flying into the upper world. His remarkable talent was what brought him to Yolanda. After that, he successfully entered the Mist Palace with the help of Yolanda. He found out about the story of Supreme Lord Illusion there. He knew that those who ascended to the upper world could also achieve supreme achievements and become a Supreme Lord to be admired by the living creatures in the universe. When they were in the lower world, Javier had met Yolanda during a crisis. Yolanda had offered him help and even trained him to become one of the most powerful warriors in the great world. When he had already achieved his goal, he sought for Yolanda. However, he discovered that she was only a clone that had already returned to the upper world. When he found out about this, he decided to follow her. He didn't want to give up looking for Yolanda even though he knew Yolanda didn't necessarily like him. He just wanted to prove to her that he could become a great warrior too, just like Supreme Lord Illusion. But now, the law storm was becoming stronger and stronger. The wounds on his body were becoming increasingly severe. Both his legs and arms were so seriously injured that his bone was already protruding. He relied on his strong willpower to be able to make it through for now. As for Zen, he was still in third place. His speed didn't increase, and he also didn't slow down. As he kept moving into the depths of the law storm, he saw more beauty of it. Along the way, for example, he saw the purple ice crystals that regularly formed strange lines on the ground. These lines were all completely natural, but they contained the very unique law power. He also saw the terrace-like pools where the purple liquid flowed, but if one looked carefully, one would see that the liquid was actually caused by the lightning. Of course, among these magnificent layers hid danger. If Zen wasn't careful, then the law power would pounce right at him. Just as Zen was advancing, there was a violent roar that came from the front. Ah! Zen looked over and saw a figure. Javier. Zen didn't really know Javier, but he knew that he was the warrior that ranked first in the Swallow Cloud House. He also said something strange when Yolanda used the red cloud ring to select warriors. He seemed to be pursuing Yolanda. When Zen walked in, he found Javier's body entangled among the golden vines. He was struggling, trying to break free from the vines. He looked like he was having difficulty breathing and his body was covered in wounds. He looked miserable. Zen was stunned to see Javier struggle like that. He exhaled a deep breath to calm himself down. While these golden vines were not living creatures, they were formed by the wood law. No matter how hard Javier struggled, he wouldn't be able to break free from these vines. Zen's figure flashed as he hovered in the air. He then asked, "Do you need help?" Javier had been struggling for quite a while and he still hadn't been able to get rid of the golden vines. Suddenly, he heard Zen. He glared back at him, "No. But you can't escape these vines on your own," Zen said, lowering his head. He knew that there were some warriors who had strange tempers, so he asked Javier first instead of helping him right away. The more talented a warrior was, the more temperamental he was. At that moment, Javier suddenly raised his head and stared at Zen. He looked crazily at him as he said, "What I want is to prove my strength, so I don't need your help." Hearing this, Zen smirked. "Are you doing this for Yolanda?" Why are you calling her by her first name?" Javier said in a cold voice, his face indignant. Yolanda held a high position in Mist Palace. Normally, the young talented warriors would address Yolanda as Master, and none of them dared to call her by her name alone. But Javier called Yolanda by her name because he had met Yolanda in the lower world before. In addition to that, he had always felt that he was special to Yolanda. Besides, Yolanda didn't care what they called her. Zen smiled faintly and said, "Is it that strange? You aren't the only one who met Yolanda in a great world. You're also a warrior from the lower world, and you." Javier had cultivated in isolation in order to take part in the passing the torch, so he didn't know anything about Zen. Before Javier could even finish speaking, Zen nodded his head and said, "That's right, Yolanda has so many clones, so you're not the only one she's encountered." Javier was silent upon hearing this, and he didn't look so indignant anymore. Zen continued, "I know you want to prove yourself to Yolanda, but you seem to have made a mistake." "What mistake?" Javier said coldly. "The Yolanda you like isn't the same Yolanda you are meeting now. The clone is not the main body after all. After Yolanda devours the clone, it will disappear from this world. So you don't need to prove anything to the current Yolanda." Zen wasn't a relationship expert, but since Javier had ascended to the upper world like he did, he didn't mind saying stuff like this to him. Suddenly, the atmosphere outside the enchanted barrier tower became awkward. Even Yolanda, who normally kept a straight face, had a strange expression. The rest of the palace leaders were knowingly eyeing Yolanda. As for the old man in cotton clothes, he chuckled and said, "Now these young warriors are very strange and interesting. I can't believe they can manage to talk about things like that in the middle of this lost storm." Javier was calm upon hearing what Zen had said. Zen shook his head as if he thought there was no use persuading Javier anymore. He just wanted to tell Javier what he thought. To Yolanda, her clones were just trivial memories. She couldn't possibly reciprocate Javier's affection. After Zen finished speaking, he didn't linger anymore and continued moving forward. It was up to Javier if he was going to accept it or not. As they got distracted by Zen and Javier, everyone quickly turned their attention to Layla, who had already traveled over 16,000 miles. She was only 2,000 miles away from Supreme Lord Illusion's record. However, as she reached this, it was increasingly becoming difficult to move forward. Chapter 1060, An Incredible Record. She's already reached the 16,000th mile. This Layla, she's really amazing. I have no doubt that this woman is going to be admitted to the Spring Fragrance Pavilion when she passes the test of passing the torch. It's truly impressive. Back when I took the test in the Enchanted Barrier Tower, I was only able to travel 13,000 miles. That was already my limit. The leaders of the palaces were all shocked at Layla's capabilities. Even though she'd already impressed them earlier, they never thought that she would break a record. Everyone was more amazed at what happened next. When Layla surpassed the 16,000 miles mark, she increased her speed again. Her body was then covered in a layer of cyan light, and a small crack appeared on the spot between her eyebrows where a small cyan stone could be seen. The stone was about the size of a fingertip and it looked nothing out of the ordinary. When the leaders saw the stone, they seemed to be shocked. The old man in cotton clothes even stood up in surprise. The Wrath of the Ocean. She actually has the Wrath of the Ocean. That old Chiron really did hide it quite well. Some were surprised while some sighed. The other martial artists who were also watching were confused. They didn't know what the Wrath of the Ocean was. The old man in cotton clothes descended slowly back to his chair and muttered, "That's not right. If Layla has the Wrath of the Ocean, it's impossible that the Spring Fragrance Pavilion didn't know, and Chiron wouldn't have sent her to participate in passing the torch in the first place. From the looks of it, he probably doesn't know that Layla has the Wrath of the Ocean." Yolanda said as she nodded. She was suddenly looking at Layla in a different light. In fact, Yolanda had always thought that Zen would surpass Layla sooner or later. It was something she'd always believed in based on the memories of two of her clones. However, when she saw that Layla had the Wrath of the Ocean, she started to question her judgment. The Wrath of the Ocean was an extremely special and powerful talent. In the upper world, special talents, skills, and physiques weren't uncommon. For instance, there was an ancient ogre who had a physique that was indestructible. When the cultivator reached a certain realm, his body could never be destroyed. Even when he was turned to fine powder, he could still recover. Other examples were the purple power body, the genuine phoenix and genuine dragon bloodlines, and all sorts of legendary beasts bloodlines. There were some martial artists that came from these bloodlines, and it wasn't uncommon at all. Just like the dragon lineage human of the genuine dragon world, almost all of them were descended from the bloodline of the genuine dragon. They might be extremely rare in the lower world, but they were very common in the supreme worlds. But the Wrath of the Ocean was different. Martial artists with the Wrath of the Ocean were extremely rare and still remained a mystery to all the supreme worlds. It was said that every Wrath of the Ocean had different abilities, but there was definitely a law of causality within each of them. What was even more amazing was that the law of causality grew along with the martial artist's growth. The weapons that possessed the law of causality were also supreme divine weapons. In all the supreme worlds, there were only about less than 3,000 supreme divine weapons. Ordinary martial artists wouldn't be able to see any of these weapons in their lifetime. They could only be able to see the names of these weapons on the universe spirit tablet. Once a supreme divine weapon was forged, the law of causality within it would not be changed, and it was even more impossible for it to grow stronger. This was why the leaders were all astounded when they saw the cyan stone on Layla's forehead. Once Layla activated the wrath of the ocean, her speed only increased. 17,000 miles, 18,000 miles, 19,000 miles, 20,000 miles. In just less than 5 minutes, Layla had already broken Supreme Lord Illusion's record. She hadn't even broken a sweat. Within 10 minutes, Layla had already surpassed 20,000 miles. From here on, as Layla continued, she was just creating her own record now. The leaders were all watching with excitement. They wanted to know how far Layla could go. Yolanda pursed her lips and shifted her gaze back to Zen. Zen's achievements were also amazing too. He wasn't by any means slow and he'd already reached the 16,000th mile. If Layla hadn't been here, Zen would have been the center of attraction. What a pity that Layla was so incredibly talented. When Zen had reached the 16,000th mile, Layla had already reached the 20,000th mile by then. Zen's achievement paled in comparison. Layla's speed is still increasing. One of the leaders cried. At this point, no one was paying any attention to Zen anymore. All of the leaders had their eyes fixed on Layla. As she continued to move forward, the lost storm became more and more terrifying. However, she did not slow down, instead she moved even faster. Everyone was astounded. They all collectively gasped in admiration. 21,000 miles, 22,000 miles, 23,000 miles. Every time Layla advanced 1,000 miles, the leaders of the palaces would exclaim in amazement. As for the talents on the side of the square, they also marveled at her achievements. They no longer were in the place to be envious of this kind of woman. In the future, Layla would definitely become someone that they would look up to. However, at this moment, the old man in cotton clothes said faintly, Zen has also passed the 18,000 miles mark. The leaders who were staring at Layla finally withdrew their gazes from Layla. Zen also broke Supreme Lord Illusion's record. That's amazing. If Layla wasn't here, Zen's achievement would still be just as amazing. What a pity. Zen is really unlucky. He should have set a new record, but in the end, Layla managed to set a more incredible record before him. The warriors in the square also started to discuss amongst themselves. Who knows who's going to win? Zen may not be fast, but he's still moving forward. He might even be able to catch up with Layla. That's impossible. Layla has reached the 24,000th mile. They're apart by 5,000 miles. Once they go deeper into the tower, it'll be more difficult for him to catch up. How could you say he can catch up? Of course he can't catch up. Everyone, look, Zen isn't moving. Suddenly, Zen stopped and everyone saw it. Before this, Zen had continued to advance at a steady pace. He was neither slow nor fast. It was this rate of speed that allowed him to jump from last place to second place. Zen stopping meant that he had run into trouble. I'm afraid that he has reached his limit. That might be the case. The lost storm is at the level that he can no longer withstand. Layla has already passed 240,000 miles. As Layla constantly broke record after record, everyone couldn't help but wonder, how far could she go? However, they all believed that in the end, the record that she would set would be one that wouldn't be surpassed anytime soon by anyone. What she had achieved today was outstanding, even more so than the record Supreme Lord Illusion had set before. Just as they expected, after Layla broke through the 24,000 mark, her speed was still astonishingly fast without any signs of decreasing or stopping. As for Zen, he had seemingly stopped at the 18,000 mark and he wasn't moving, as if he was meditating. Yolanda pursed her lips as she gazed at Zen. She was a little worried. From the very beginning, she had thought highly of Zen and hoped that he would surpass Layla. But now, Zen was seemingly stuck in the middle of the lost storm. What is he up to? She wondered. 25,000 miles, 26,000 miles, 27,000 miles. I'm going crazy, this woman's a freak. Layla didn't slow down until she reached the 28,000th mile. She finally slowed down. She has already surpassed Supreme Lord Illusion's record by 10,000 miles. That's unbelievable. Of course she has to slow down. If she continues to advance deeper into the tower, then she'll reach the place where the lost storm is completely out of control. There's an inner layer of the lost storm that's impossible to be seen. Layla's speed rapidly decreased. After reaching the 28,000th mile, she had advanced another 200 miles before she came to a stop. Not long after, Layla's figure appeared at the entrance of the enchanted barrier tower with a huge smile on her face. While she was proud, she was still approachable. The martial artists from the 13 palaces looked at her with great admiration as if she were some superior being. When Layla returned to the side of the square, she looked up at the enchanted barrier tower and asked, "Where's Zen?" He's still at the 18,000 mark.